Welcome to Audio Mentors, your space dedicated to exploring the great thoughts and teachings of philosophy and personal development. On this occasion, we bring you an exclusive summary of Human, All Too Human by Friedrich Nietzsche, a book that challenges traditional beliefs and invites us to reflect deeply on human nature, morality, and freedom. This book presents Nietzsche's philosophical ideas, which question established values and promote a radically new approach to how we should live our lives. Throughout this summary, we will explore how Nietzsche analyzes morality, knowledge, art, and psychology, and how his concepts of the will to power, the Superman, and nihilism are still relevant today. This summary has been made exclusively for us, with the aim of providing you with the key lessons of this text without the need to read it from cover to cover. Here you will find the fundamental ideas that will allow you to understand the essence of Nietzsche's thought and how to apply them to your daily life. If you like this content and want to continue exploring more audiobooks, summaries, and philosophical reflections, don't forget to subscribe to Audio Mentors. By doing so, you will have access to more valuable resources that will help you continue growing, learning, and achieving success in your personal and professional life. Let's begin this journey towards wisdom and self-knowledge. Chapter 1. Introduction. The Philosophy of Self-Liberation. In the first chapter of Human, All Too Human, Friedrich Nietzsche presents one of the most fundamental ideas of his philosophy, the need for self-liberation of the human being. This self-liberation not only refers to freeing oneself from the dogmas and external restrictions imposed by society, morality, and religion, but also to reaching a state of intellectual and emotional independence. Nietzsche sets out a radical challenge to the dominant philosophies and belief systems of his time, inviting us to question, reinterpret, and eventually free ourselves from the inherited concepts and values that have shaped our view of the world. Nietzsche's critique of conventional philosophies. Nietzsche begins this chapter with a profound critique of the conventional philosophies that dominate Western society. According to him, the great philosophical traditions, such as the teachings of Plato, Aristotle, and later Christianity, have created a system of values that is not only disconnected from reality, but also oppresses authentic human freedom. Nietzsche argues that these philosophies, instead of promoting human flourishing and authenticity, have imposed norms on us that deny our nature, our passions, and our will to power. Christian morality, in particular, is seen by Nietzsche as one of the greatest obstacles to self-liberation. Christianity, with its emphasis on humility, sacrifice, and the rejection of earthly pleasures, has instilled the idea that a full life can only be achieved through renunciation of the mundane. According to Nietzsche, this morality is not only oppressive, but also a form of weakness, as it encourages individuals to deny their natural desires and submit to an external force, God or the morality imposed by the Church. Self-liberation as the overcoming of limitations. Self-liberation, in Nietzsche's vision, is the process of overcoming all the limitations imposed by tradition, religion, and conventional morality. It is not a question of physical liberation, but of psychological and philosophical liberation. Human beings must free themselves from preconceived ideas about what is right and what is wrong, from the notions of sin and virtue imposed by traditional morality, and must be capable of affirming their own existence without feeling guilty or restricted by alien norms. Nietzsche sees self-liberation as an invitation to create our own morality, based on our own values and desires, rather than simply following a moral code imposed on us by society or religion. This requires courage and the willingness to question the beliefs that have been instilled in us since childhood. Only when we free ourselves from these conditioning factors can we begin to live authentically, rather than blindly following the expectations of others. Intellectual freedom. Questioning and reevaluating established values. A central aspect of self-liberation is intellectual freedom. Nietzsche argues that, to be truly free, we must question all traditional beliefs about morality, religion, knowledge, and existence. This intellectual freedom allows us to reevaluate what we consider to be true and accept that there are no universal, immutable truths. Instead of accepting established dogmas, we should commit ourselves to the search for personal truth, a truth that is adapted to our own experience and vision of the world. For Nietzsche, Intellectual freedom is essential because it allows the individual to take control of their life and their destiny. By freeing ourselves from the influence of external ideas, we acquire the capacity to redefine what it means to live a full and meaningful life. This does not imply a total rejection of tradition, but rather a process of revaluation, where we decide which elements of the past deserve to be preserved and which elements should be rejected to allow for personal growth. Self-liberation and morality. Creating our own values. Nietzsche is known for his radical critique of traditional morality, and in this chapter he begins to develop his vision of a morality of the Lord's based on the will to power and the affirmation of life. Unlike Christian morality, which values humility, submission, and spiritual poverty, Nietzsche proposes a morality that celebrates strength, independence, and personal growth. This morality, according to him, must arise from the individual himself, not from a set of rules imposed from outside. Self-liberation implies the ability to create our own values, which means that we are responsible for defining what is good or bad, what is valuable or insignificant. Instead of living under the shadow of other people's ideals, we must dare to create our own ethical principles based on our personal experiences, desires, and objectives. This act of creation is what gives our lives meaning, as it allows us to live in accordance with our deepest values, instead of simply following the norms imposed by society. The will to power, the vital impulse for self-liberation. One of Nietzsche's best-known concepts is the will to power, which plays a fundamental role in self-liberation. The will to power is the fundamental drive of all human beings, the desire to assert oneself, to grow, to overcome obstacles, and to achieve excellence. According to Nietzsche, life itself is an expression of the will to power, since everything that exists, from human beings to the forces of nature, is driven by this inherent desire for power and self-improvement. The will to power is seen by Nietzsche as the force that drives us to free ourselves from external restrictions and to reach our maximum potential. This will should not be understood as a simple desire for control over others, but as an impulse towards self-discovery, self-creation, and the constant surpassing of our own limitations. Self-liberation, in this sense, is closely linked to the will to power, as both involve a process of affirmation of life and of one's own desires. Self-liberation and the rejection of traditional beliefs. Finally, self-liberation is also an act of rejecting the traditional beliefs that have dominated human life for centuries. Nietzsche criticizes not only Christian morality, but also the philosophical tradition that has linked human life to transcendental ideals such as virtue, sacrifice, and obedience. By freeing our minds and our lives from these beliefs, we can achieve a new form of existence, one that is more authentic, freer, and more in harmony with our true nature. This rejection of traditional beliefs, however, does not imply a moral or existential void. Instead of falling into nihilism, Nietzsche proposes a new way of life based on the creation of new values and the desire to live with purpose and passion. Self-liberation is, therefore, a continuous process of reevaluation and self-discovery, in which each individual becomes the creator of his or her own destiny. Conclusion of the chapter. The first chapter of Human, All Too Human presents the philosophy of self-liberation as the fundamental process for achieving a more authentic, free, and meaningful life. Nietzsche invites us to free ourselves from the restrictions imposed by traditional morality, religion, and inherited philosophical ideas, to create our own values and live by our own rules. Self-liberation is not an act of blind rebellion, but a process of reevaluating and affirming our will to power, growth, and self-improvement. In the next chapter, Man and His Nature, we will delve deeper into how Nietzsche understands human nature, its inherent limitations, and how these factors affect our ability to live an authentic and free life. Chapter 2. Man and His Nature. In this second chapter of Human, All Too Human, Friedrich Nietzsche delves into the complex and often contradictory nature of humanity. Throughout this analysis, Nietzsche challenges traditional conceptions that idealize human beings and their capacity to achieve perfection. Unlike philosophical views that seek to find a higher or divine ideal in humanity, Nietzsche argues that the true nature of man is much more complex, limited, and in many cases, contradictory. Instead of seeing man as a creature in search of perfection, Nietzsche invites us to accept our humanity as it is, with all its imperfections and contradictions, in order to free ourselves from the idealistic concepts that have conditioned us throughout history. Man as a limited being. Nietzsche begins this chapter by recognizing that human beings, despite their capacity for reason, art, morality, and knowledge, continue to be beings limited by their own biological, psychological, and social nature. Throughout history, philosophies and religions have idealized human beings, presenting them as beings endowed with almost divine capacities or as agents who can achieve moral or spiritual perfection. However, Nietzsche rejects this idealistic vision and invites us to recognize our limitations as human beings. Human limitation is a recurring theme in Nietzsche's philosophy. Accepting our finite nature, our passions, our weaknesses, and our most basic impulses is fundamental to understanding true freedom and authenticity. Rejecting the idea of a perfect human being allows us to free ourselves from external expectations and begin to live according to our own reality. Instead of aspiring to an impossible ideal, Nietzsche urges us to embrace who we are and face our existence as it is. The contradiction in human nature. Nietzsche also points out that man is inherently contradictory. On the one hand, he possesses the capacity for reason and reflection, which allows him to understand the world, create ideas, and seek knowledge. On the other hand, he remains subject to his passions, instincts, and desires, which often come into conflict with his rationality. This contradiction, according to Nietzsche, is an essential part of our nature. We are neither completely rational nor completely irrational beings, but rather we live in a state of constant tension between our highest aspirations and our most basic impulses. Far from being a weakness, this contradiction is seen by Nietzsche as a source of strength. The ability to be aware of our internal contradictions and to manage them productively allows us to develop our will to power and face the challenges of life with greater intensity and commitment. Accepting our contradictions does not weaken us, but allows us to find a new way of living authentically, without the restrictions of the rigid and dehumanizing ideals that have been imposed on us. Criticism of human optimism and utopias. Nietzsche also makes a forceful critique of optimistic movements that promote the idea that human beings can, over time, achieve moral, spiritual, or social perfection. These utopias, which have been upheld by many philosophers and religious movements, are not only unattainable, but also harmful. Human optimism, like religious beliefs that promise us eternal life or redemption, diverts our attention from reality and prevents us from facing our limitations. According to Nietzsche, the ideals of human perfection and universal morality are illusions that only serve to keep us tied to a worldview that denies our imperfect nature. By focusing on the idea of an idealized future, we run the risk of losing sight of what really matters, life here and now, with all its imperfections and contradictions. True wisdom, according to Nietzsche, lies in accepting our humanity as it is, without aspiring to unattainable perfection. The importance of affirming life. Throughout the chapter, Nietzsche emphasizes the importance of affirming life as it is. Instead of seeking to escape our limitations, our sufferings, or our contradictions, we must learn to embrace them and find strength in them. Affirming life, in this sense, is an act of courage. It is facing reality with open eyes and accepting that our existence is marked by struggle, suffering, and imperfection. For Nietzsche, living authentically means accepting the dark sides of our human nature, such as selfishness, aggressiveness, or the desire for power, and learning to transform them into productive forces. The affirmation of life is not a passive acceptance, but an active process of creation and transformation. By embracing our contradictions and limitations, we can overcome the suffering they cause us and live in accordance with our own values and desires. The influence of nature on man. Nietzsche also reflects on how our biological nature influences the way we are and act. Despite the apparent supremacy of human reason, we are still biological creatures governed by instinctive impulses. These biological influences, often considered base or primitive, are fundamental to our existence and should not be rejected, but understood and channeled in a productive way. Human nature is not separate from our biology, and Nietzsche insists that we should integrate our passions, desires, and emotions into our conscious life, rather than repressing or denying them. The struggle between the rational and the instinctive is part of what makes us human, and understanding this duality allows us to live more authentically and coherently with our true nature. The importance of self-acceptance and self-liberation. The road to self-liberation, according to Nietzsche, begins with self-acceptance. Only when we are capable of accepting our limitations, our contradictions, and our darkest impulses can we begin to free ourselves from the external expectations that keep us tied to an idealized vision of what we should be. Self-acceptance does not mean giving up or settling for mediocrity, but rather recognizing the truth of our nature and using it as the basis for our own creation. Self-liberation is, therefore, a process of internal transformation. By freeing ourselves from the social, religious, and philosophical norms that limit us, we can begin to live according to our own principles, embracing our passions and desires without fear or guilt. This is the true path to freedom and authenticity, according to Nietzsche, a path of affirmation of life in all its dimensions. Conclusion of the chapter. In Man and His Nature, Nietzsche invites us to accept our limitations, contradictions, and imperfections as an integral part of our humanity. Far from being an obstacle to personal fulfillment, these characteristics are sources of power and transformation. By understanding and embracing our human nature, we can free ourselves from unattainable ideals and live a more authentic and purposeful life. In the next chapter, Morality and the Critique of Religion, we will explore how Nietzsche challenges traditional ideas of morality and religion, criticizing the power structures that have conditioned our view of good and evil. Chapter 3, Morality and the Critique of Religion. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche offers a profound critique of traditional moral foundations and the influence of religion, especially Christianity, in the formation of social and ethical norms. Nietzsche argues that traditional morality not only limits individual development, but also distorts our understanding of what it means to live an authentic and full life. Religion, in particular, has imposed a set of values that promote submission, humility, and the denial of human instincts, creating a morality that Nietzsche considers decadent and contrary to the affirmation of life. Traditional morality as oppressive. Nietzsche begins this chapter by analyzing how traditional morality, especially Christian morality, has imposed a set of values that value weakness, submission, and the denial of human beings' natural desires. According to Nietzsche, this morality originated as a form of social and political control, promoting conformity and sacrifice at the expense of the individual. Instead of encouraging people to live according to their own desires and talents, traditional morality condemns them to live under a rigid set of rules that do not take into account individual needs and aspirations. Christianity, in particular, has focused on the idea that human beings must submit to a higher authority, God, and renounce earthly pleasures in favor of a heavenly reward. Nietzsche sees this as a sign of weakness, as it promotes a vision of life that denies human beings' natural instincts and desires. By denying ourselves in favor of a transcendental ideal, we distance ourselves from what it really means to be human, according to Nietzsche. Christian morality, then, reinforces a mentality of slavery, where the individual sees himself as inferior and must live to fulfill external expectations, instead of developing his own will to power. The morality of the slaves versus the morality of the masters. One of the key distinctions that Nietzsche makes in this chapter is the difference between what he calls the morality of the slaves and the morality of the masters. The morality of the slaves is the morality that originated in the need of the lower and oppressed classes of society to justify their suffering and subordination. In this moral system, values such as humility, submission, sacrifice, and forgiveness are considered virtues, while the instincts of power, pride, and ambition are seen as vices. This type of morality, according to Nietzsche, favors weakness and self-denial, leading to a life of dissatisfaction and resentment. On the other hand, the morality of the lords, in contrast, is the morality of powerful and autonomous individuals who affirm their own life and their own values. In this moral system, power, creativity, self-sufficiency, and self-affirmation are considered virtues, while submission and weakness are looked down upon. The morality of the masters is not limited by the expectations of society, but is based on the will to power and the desire to better oneself. Nietzsche argues that, throughout history, the morality of slaves has gained predominance, especially with the rise of Christianity. However, he believes that in order to achieve an authentic and truly free life, we must reject the morality of slaves and adopt a morality that celebrates strength, independence, and the affirmation of life. Religion as a form of social control. Nietzsche also criticizes religion as a tool of social control. According to him, religion not only imposes a set of moral values that restrict individual freedom, but also serves to maintain social order by perpetuating submission and obedience. Through the promise of heavenly rewards and the threat of divine punishment, religion reinforces obedience and conformity. Nietzsche argues that this is particularly damaging as it discourages people from questioning power structures and living in accordance with their own desires and aspirations. Religion, for Nietzsche, is a system that oppresses the individual by imposing on them a worldview that denies their nature and makes them dependent on an external authority. Instead of encouraging self-sufficiency and self-discovery, religion creates a dependence on God and the Church, which in turn limits the potential of the individual. For Nietzsche, true freedom can only be achieved when we free ourselves from the restrictions imposed by religion and start to live according to our own will. Nihilism as a result of traditional morality. An important concept that Nietzsche addresses in this chapter is nihilism, the feeling that life lacks intrinsic meaning or purpose. According to Nietzsche, Christianity and traditional morality have contributed to the emergence of nihilism by promoting a vision of life that is negative, oriented towards renunciation and suffering. By rejecting life in favor of a transcendental ideal, religion creates an existential void in which the individual feels disconnected from reality and from his or her own being. Nietzsche sees nihilism as one of the most destructive consequences of traditional morality, as it leads to a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. Instead of affirming life and creating meaning through our own actions, nihilism leaves us trapped in an empty existence, without purpose or direction. However, Nietzsche does not see nihilism as the end, but as a necessary phase in the process of self-liberation. By recognizing the inherent meaninglessness of the world, we can free ourselves from illusions and begin to create our own values and goals, a task he considers essential to achieving true freedom. The call for the creation of new values. Nietzsche's critique of traditional morality and religion is also a call for the creation of new values. Instead of depending on values imposed from outside, Nietzsche urges us to develop our own values through self-affirmation, critical reflection, and the will to power. Morality, according to Nietzsche, should be an individual creation and not an external imposition. By freeing ourselves from the restrictions of traditional morality, we can begin to live in accordance with our own passions, desires, and aspirations, creating a sense of meaning that does not depend on an external authority. Conclusion of the chapter. In On Morality and the Critique of Religion, Nietzsche challenges us to question deeply the beliefs and values we have inherited. Traditional morality and religion, he argues, limit us and keep us subject to a vision of life that denies our true nature. Only by rejecting these restrictions and creating our own values can we achieve an authentic life, full of power and meaning. This is the first step towards self-liberation and overcoming the limitations imposed by society, religion, and conventional morality. In the next chapter, Knowledge, Between Illusion and Truth, Nietzsche delves deeper into the limits of human knowledge, exploring how our perception of reality is influenced by our emotions, desires, and illusions. Chapter 4, Knowledge, Between Illusion and Truth. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche delves into the nature of knowledge and how, in most cases, it is profoundly influenced by our illusions and desires. Whereas traditional philosophy has tended to see knowledge as a way of accessing absolute truth, Nietzsche challenges this conception, arguing that all human knowledge is marked by our cognitive and emotional limitations. Instead of seeing truth as something unchanging and accessible, Nietzsche argues that truth is, to a large extent, a construction that depends on our individual perspectives, our experiences, and our personal inclinations. Knowledge as a subjective process. Nietzsche begins this chapter by emphasizing that knowledge is not something objective, absolute, and universal. Unlike philosophers who believed in the existence of a transcendental and immutable truth, Nietzsche argues that our understanding of the world is always mediated by our subjective being. Each individual has a unique perspective, influenced by their biology, their psyche, their passions, and their social and cultural environment. As a result, there is no such thing as pure or universal knowledge. Rather, all knowledge is colored by our interpretations and desires. The idea that knowledge is subjective and personal is fundamental to Nietzsche's critique of traditional philosophies, which often seek a truth that is beyond human beings. Nietzsche invites us to be aware of how our emotions, interests, and prejudices affect our perception of reality. Instead of seeking an immutable truth, we must accept that our understanding of the world is inevitably influenced by our individual perspective. The illusion of objectivity. One of the key points Nietzsche makes is how the objectivity and neutrality often associated with knowledge are, in reality, illusory. Science, for example, has presented itself as an objective search for truth, but Nietzsche argues that even scientists are subject to the same human limitations as any other individual. The illusion of objectivity, for him, lies in the belief that we can achieve a disinterested and pure knowledge, free from any emotional or subjective influence. Science, although in many ways more accurate than other forms of knowledge, is also subject to the perspectives and desires of those who practice it. Scientific theories, according to Nietzsche, are not absolute truths, but human constructions that arise from our need to make sense of a chaotic world full of uncertainty. Even mathematics, considered by many to be the purest example of objective knowledge, is based on axioms and principles that are ultimately the product of the human mind. Truth as a social and cultural construct. Nietzsche goes on to argue that what we understand as truth is profoundly influenced by the social and cultural structures that surround us. Throughout history, societies have defined what is considered true and what is considered false, and these definitions are related to the needs and interests of those societies. Religion, morality, and politics have played a crucial role in the construction of what is considered true, and these constructions are neither objective nor universal. For Nietzsche, truth is not a reflection of objective reality, but a form of adaptation to the conditions and needs of human life. Truth, therefore, is something that changes over time and varies from one culture to another. The values and beliefs that are considered true at a given time can be replaced by other values in the future, as circumstances and social needs change. Truth and power. Nietzsche also analyzes how the search for truth is often linked to the desire for power. Truth, in many cases, is not sought for its intrinsic value, but for the control it can give to those who possess it. Throughout human history, systems of power have used knowledge and truth as tools to control the masses and consolidate their authority. Religion, for example, has used divine truth to subjugate people, while political systems have used the truth of the law to maintain order and obedience. Nietzsche argues that truth is not separate from power. On the contrary, the creation of what we consider to be true is largely motivated by the power relations that exist within a society. Therefore, truth should not be seen as a neutral concept, but as something that is in a constant struggle to be defined and controlled by those in power. The importance of interpretation and reevaluation. Instead of searching for an unchanging truth, Nietzsche invites us to reinterpret and reevaluate our beliefs and knowledge. Instead of accepting the truth imposed on us by tradition, religion, or authority, we must learn to question it and create our own vision of the world. This process of reinterpretation is essential for self-liberation, as it allows us to free ourselves from the power structures that have conditioned us and to create knowledge that reflects our own needs and aspirations. Nietzsche encourages us to be creators of meaning, to stop depending on pre-existing explanations and truths, and to seek knowledge that is relevant to our life and experience. This active approach to truth is part of the will to power, as it implies not only accepting the world as it is, but also transforming it through our own vision. Knowledge as a tool for authentic life. At the end of the chapter, Nietzsche reminds us that knowledge should be a tool for authentic living, not an end in itself. Truth has no value if it does not allow us to live more freely, creatively, and meaningfully. The search for knowledge should not be a disinterested search to discover objective facts, but a way of increasing our capacity to live in accordance with our will to power and our personal aspirations. For Nietzsche, wisdom does not lie in the accumulation of facts or in the attainment of absolute knowledge, but in the ability to live autonomously, free from the constraints of false truths imposed by society or tradition. True knowledge, therefore, is that which allows us to affirm our life and our individuality, rather than limiting us to a vision of the world that does not belong to us. Conclusion of the chapter. In On Truth and Lie, Nietzsche challenges us to reconsider our understanding of truth and knowledge. Truth is not something objective, eternal, and unchangeable, but a human construction influenced by our passions, interests, and power relations. Instead of searching for a transcendental truth, we should learn to reinterpret and revalue our beliefs, creating knowledge that is relevant to our life and our experience. Only in this way can we free ourselves from the illusions that limit us and live authentically and freely. In the next chapter, The Psychology of Modern Man, we will explore how human motivations and behaviors have been shaped by modern society and how this influences our capacity to achieve freedom and self-liberation. Chapter 5. The Psychology of Modern Man. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche delves into the study of human psychology, analyzing the motivations, desires, and behaviors that characterize modern man. For Nietzsche, the psychology of the human being cannot be separated from the social and cultural structures that have conditioned our perceptions, thoughts, and actions. As society advances, the forms of social control and value systems evolve, and with them, the psychological characteristics of human beings also evolve. Nietzsche examines how social norms, the concept of morality and power structures have influenced the psychology of modern man, leading him to a life of self-censorship, contradiction, and alienation. Modern man, a creature of contradictions. Nietzsche begins this chapter by highlighting that modern man, although apparently freer and more rational, is marked by a profound internal contradiction. In modern society, human beings find themselves trapped between two worlds, that of their natural instincts and that of the social expectations that impose on them norms of behavior, morality, and success. This tension between what we are in our deepest essence and what society expects of us creates a constant psychological conflict, which often leads the individual to repress their most authentic desires and live a life of conformity. Modern man is conditioned to follow society's expectations, to be productive, to be materially successful, and to adhere to a moral system that does not necessarily reflect his true desires. This structure of life generates an internal alienation, as the individual does not act according to his or her own values, but to values imposed from outside. Nietzsche sees this disconnection as one of the main sources of psychological suffering in modern society and a factor that prevents personal fulfillment and self-liberation. The influence of morality on human psychology. One of Nietzsche's strongest criticisms in this chapter is the way in which traditional morality has influenced human psychology. Christian morality and other moralities that have prevailed in modern society are based on the idea that certain behaviors are inherently bad and others are good. This division between good and evil creates an internal struggle in the individual, who must repress his desires and behaviors that society considers immoral. Instead of embracing his instinctive nature, modern man is forced to deny fundamental aspects of himself in order to conform to a morality that values humility, submission, and renunciation. Nietzsche argues that this morality is harmful to the individual because it prevents him from living authentically. Imposed morality, far from fostering personal growth, creates a sense of guilt and self-loathing. Instead of valuing life as it is, with all its impulses, desires, and contradictions, modern man is conditioned to reject these aspects of himself and aspire to an abstract moral ideal. Modern psychology, therefore, is marked by this internal struggle between the natural desires of human beings and the external expectations that repress them. The repression of instincts and its consequences. In this chapter, Nietzsche delves into the concept of the repression of instincts and how this profoundly affects the psychology of modern man. In their quest to adhere to social and moral norms, individuals repress their most basic desires, such as the desire for power, ambition, aggressiveness, and sexuality. This repression, according to Nietzsche, not only creates an internal struggle, but also has destructive effects on a psychological level. The repression of instincts generates constant tension in the individual, which can manifest itself in forms of anxiety, depression, resentment, and even psychosomatic illnesses. Emotional energy that is not expressed or channeled in a healthy way accumulates and becomes a source of suffering. Nietzsche criticizes this process of repression, arguing that true freedom can only be achieved when the individual is able to accept and channel their instincts in a creative way, instead of suppressing them. Asceticism and its impact on human psychology. Nietzsche also dedicates a significant part of the chapter to criticizing asceticism as a way of life that promotes the denial of earthly pleasures and submission to an external authority. Asceticism, which has been a fundamental value in many religions and philosophies, is seen by Nietzsche as a form of self-repression that destroys human vitality and creativity. By rejecting natural pleasures and desires, asceticism generates a disconnection with life itself. The psychological impact of asceticism is devastating, according to Nietzsche. By denying life, the body, and natural desires, the individual becomes alienated from his own existence. Instead of living life to the full, the ascetic is trapped in an existence of suffering, guilt, and despair, since he renounces that which gives him energy and purpose in life. The psychology of modern man, influenced by asceticism, is marked by a denial of life and a lack of connection with that which makes life valuable and exciting. Modern man and the need for self-affirmation. For Nietzsche, the solution to the alienation and repression of modern man lies in self-affirmation. Instead of following the rules imposed by morality and society, the individual must learn to affirm his own will, to embrace his instinctive nature, and to live according to his own values. Self-affirmation involves accepting all aspects of oneself, including instincts and desires, and using them as forces for personal growth. The psychology of modern man, according to Nietzsche, can be transformed through this process of self-affirmation. By setting aside external expectations and creating our own values, we can liberate our internal energy and live authentically. This act of affirmation of life not only leads to greater personal freedom, but also allows the individual to reach their full potential without being limited by the restrictions of traditional morality or social expectations. The psychology of the Übermensch. Nietzsche introduces the concept of Übermensch or Superman as the individual who has overcome the limitations imposed by society and traditional morality. The Superman is someone who lives according to his own will to power, who has embraced his instincts and created his own values. The psychology of the Superman is the psychology of total self-affirmation, of absolute freedom to live according to his own principles. The Superman is not a perfect being, but someone who has overcome the limitations of conventional morality and lives according to his own desires and aspirations. In this sense, Nietzsche sees the Superman as the ideal to which modern man should aspire, an autonomous, creative, and lively individual who does not submit to any external authority and who lives with purpose and passion. Conclusion of the chapter. In the psychology of the modern man, Nietzsche offers a profound critique of the way in which modern society has conditioned human psychology, promoting the repression of instincts and the alienation of the individual. Traditional morality and social structures have created a psychology characterized by internal contradiction, guilt, and suffering. However, Nietzsche invites us to overcome these limitations through self-affirmation, the creation of our own values, and the acceptance of our human nature in its entirety. By freeing our will and embracing our instincts, we can transform our psychology and achieve a more authentic and fulfilling life. This process of self-liberation is essential for the creation of a life of true power, freedom, and creativity. In the next chapter, Freedom and Determinism, we will explore the tension between human freedom and the notion of a predetermined destiny, analyzing how we can reconcile our aspirations for freedom with the forces that condition us. Chapter 6: Freedom and Determinism. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche addresses one of the deepest and most universal tensions in philosophy, the relationship between human freedom and determinism. The question of whether human beings are truly free in their actions and decisions, or whether they are predestined or conditioned by factors beyond their control, has been a central issue in philosophy since its inception. Nietzsche boldly confronts this question, challenging both rigorous determinism and the traditional notion of absolute freedom. Determinism. Are we mere puppets of fate? Nietzsche begins this chapter by criticizing worldviews that present human beings as puppets of fate, totally determined by external and uncontrollable forces. Determinism, in its strictest form, holds that every human action, every decision, and every thought is predetermined by a chain of previous causes, whether by biology, genetics, social influences, or cosmic destiny. According to this view, the concept of freedom becomes an illusion, and individuals are not responsible for their actions, since everything they do is the result of previous forces over which they have no control. Nietzsche, although he recognizes that human beings are influenced by a variety of factors, rejects the vision of determinism as a total and deterministic explanation of human life. Although biology and historical circumstances condition us, the philosopher argues that these factors do not deprive us of our ability to exercise our will to power and make meaningful choices. Determinism, in his opinion, should not be seen as an excuse for passivity or lack of responsibility. Freedom as power and self-affirmation. For Nietzsche, true freedom is not about the total absence of external influence or conditioning, but about the ability to affirm our will to power, even in the face of those limitations. Human freedom does not lie in the pure freedom of action without restrictions, but in the capacity to adapt, transform, and transcend those restrictions through the creation of our own values and objectives. Nietzsche argues that freedom is a process of affirmation of life, in which the individual, on recognizing external influences, integrates them and uses them to strengthen his or her own will. This kind of freedom is radically different from freedom conventionally understood as the ability to do anything without restriction. Nietzsche defines freedom as an internal power, as the impulse that allows us to transform the circumstances around us into something meaningful and coherent with our own vision. Freedom, then, is not simply an absence of restrictions, but the active capacity to exercise our will to shape our life. The power of the will to power. Nietzsche's central idea in this chapter is the notion of the will to power, which he presents as the essential force behind human freedom. The will to power does not refer only to the desire to dominate others, but to the fundamental force of self-affirmation, the capacity to shape our own existence. For Nietzsche, the will to power is a creative, vital, and constructive force, which is not limited to simple survival or the gratification of personal desires, but which is projected towards the development and betterment of oneself. Instead of being victims of circumstance, individuals with a strong will to power are able to assert their lives and act according to their own principles, regardless of external influences. Freedom, in this sense, is achieved when we free ourselves from submission to external laws, such as traditional morality or social conformism, and allow ourselves to act in accordance with our own nature and inner aspirations. Freedom and individual responsibility. Nietzsche also discusses how human freedom is closely related to individual responsibility. If human beings are free, then they are responsible for their decisions and actions, which means that they cannot blame external factors or deterministic forces. True freedom requires us to accept our responsibility for who we are and what we choose to be. This approach to freedom and responsibility is liberating, as it allows us to leave excuses behind and start taking control of our lives. Instead of blaming society, culture, or religion for our limitations, Nietzsche encourages us to embrace our capacity to change, grow, and overcome the circumstances that condition us. The conflict between freedom and social determinism. Nietzsche recognizes that, although human beings have the capacity to assert themselves and make free decisions, we are irremediably influenced by the social, cultural, and political structures in which we live. Modern society, with its norms, ideologies, and expectations, exercises significant control over our decisions and thoughts. This social control is not necessarily a conscious imposition, but a form of collective pressure that limits our individual freedom. In this sense, Nietzsche argues that true freedom consists not only in freeing oneself from biological or cosmic determinism, but also from the limitations imposed by society. Social norms, although often seen as necessary for order and stability, can be restrictions that prevent individual flourishing. Therefore, the struggle for freedom is also a struggle against the social structures that tell us how we should live, think, and act. The reconciliation of freedom and determinism, overcoming limitations. For Nietzsche, the reconciliation between freedom and determinism is not something that can be achieved simply by eliminating all external influences. Rather, true freedom is achieved when we are aware of the external influences that affect us. We accept them and transform them into a force that allows us to grow and transcend our limitations. Freedom is the power to overcome limitations, not to escape them. By integrating our circumstances instead of trying to free ourselves from them, we can live more fully and effectively. The key is to find the constant overcoming of our own limitations, be they biological, social, or philosophical. True freedom, according to Nietzsche, is not a total liberation from determinism, but the ability to assert ourselves through the restrictions we face. Conclusion of the chapter. In Freedom and Determinism, Nietzsche invites us to reconsider our conception of freedom. Freedom does not consist of the absence of external restrictions, but rather in the capacity to affirm our own will and act in accordance with our own values. True human freedom is the freedom to create our life, in spite of the limitations imposed on us by biological, social, and cultural determinism. This chapter highlights the importance of the will to power as the fundamental force behind freedom. By recognizing our limitations, we can overcome them and transform them into productive forces for personal growth. Freedom and responsibility are intertwined, and only by accepting our ability to choose and act can we achieve an authentic and meaningful life. In the next chapter, The Will to Power, we will delve deeper into this central concept of Nietzsche's philosophy, exploring how the will to power is not only a desire to dominate others, but a creative force essential to our existence. Chapter 7. The Will to Power. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche presents one of his most fundamental and provocative concepts, the will to power. This idea becomes one of the cornerstones of his philosophy, as it not only explains the motivation behind human action, but also how our life, our decisions, and our desires are intrinsically linked to this internal force. The will to power does not refer only to the desire to control others, as some misinterpretations suggest, but to a much broader vital energy that manifests itself in our constant struggle to improve, grow, and transform our reality. The will to power as a vital impulse. Nietzsche introduces the will to power as the fundamental impulse behind all human action. Throughout this chapter, he argues that every form of life, from human beings to animals and the forces of nature, is motivated by this essential desire for expansion and affirmation. The will to power is an inherent desire to affirm oneself, to overcome obstacles, to grow, and to create. For Nietzsche, the will to power is not simply a quest for power over others, but a creative force that drives the individual to develop and evolve. It is the energy that drives us to constantly improve, to overcome our limitations, and to reach a higher state of being. The will to power is a dynamic and continuous process in which the individual strives to shape his or her life according to his or her own desires, aspirations, and principles. The concept of power, overcoming, not domination. It is crucial to understand that, for Nietzsche, the will to power is not about simple domination over others. In fact, the concept of power in Nietzsche refers mainly to the personal and creative power to overcome our own internal limitations. The true manifestation of the will to power is found in an individual's ability to transcend their own fears, insecurities, and weaknesses. The will to power is, in the final analysis, an expression of self-affirmation, a way of being in the world that does not depend on external validation or the imposition of alien norms. Instead of seeking control over others, the individual who follows the will to power is more focused on self-discovery and self-affirmation, on the creation of their own life and destiny. It is a drive towards self-improvement and transformation, towards a richer, more intense, and more authentic life. The individual and the creation of values. An essential aspect of the will to power is the creation of values. Nietzsche asserts that human beings, being aware of their will to power, have the capacity to create their own values, instead of accepting the values imposed by society, religion, or traditional morality. This creation of values is not a superficial act of rebellion, but a profound manifestation of individual freedom, in which the individual becomes the creator of his or her own meaning. By creating their own values, individuals free themselves from the limitations imposed by conventional morality and begin to live in accordance with their most authentic desires. The will to power, then, is a liberating force that allows human beings to transcend social and religious norms and live according to a morality based on their own will and purpose. This personal morality, according to Nietzsche, is much richer and more meaningful than any set of predefined rules, as it is based on individual experience and the ability to create meaning from life itself. The will to power and the art of living. Nietzsche also associates the will to power with the art of living. To live in accordance with the will to power does not simply mean acting selfishly or destructively, but taking control of our existence, recognizing our inner strengths and learning to use that energy to improve our life and the lives of others. The will to power, then, is a way of living intensely, of embracing life as it is, with all its challenges, difficulties, and contradictions. This approach to life as an art implies that the individual not only seeks to achieve their material or selfish goals, but also strives to live in a deeper and more meaningful way. The will to power is the force that drives us to create a life that is full of purpose, passion, and authenticity, to free ourselves from mediocrity and conformity, and to constantly seek ways to better ourselves. The will to power and the transformation of society. Nietzsche also addresses how the will to power has broader implications in the social context. While the concept of the will to power refers primarily to the individual, Nietzsche argues that the accumulation of individuals following this impulse can have a transformative impact on society as a whole. By living in accordance with their will to power, individuals can challenge established power structures and create a society that celebrates authenticity, creativity, and self-improvement. This social transformation, however, is not something that is easily achieved. For Nietzsche, most people are trapped by social conventions and traditional morality, which prevents them from accessing their full capacity for will to power. Most people remain conformists, passively accepting the norms and values imposed by society. However, those who are capable of embracing the will to power can become the leaders of a new society, based on the affirmation of life and the creation of personal values. The will to power and the Superman. The concept of the Übermensch Superman is deeply related to the will to power. Nietzsche sees the Superman as the individual who has reached his highest level of self-development and self-affirmation. The Superman is someone who has overcome the limitations imposed by traditional morality and has affirmed his own life, his own values, and his own will. The will to power is the force that allows the Superman to create his own destiny and transcend the limitations of conventional humanity. The Superman is not a perfect being, but an individual who lives according to his own principles, who has managed to overcome his fears, insecurities, and weaknesses, and who dedicates himself to the constant creation of himself. Nietzsche presents the Superman as an ideal to which every individual should aspire, a model of autonomy, strength, and personal freedom. The will to power as a path to transcendence. In conclusion, Nietzsche sees the will to power as the means by which human beings can transcend their limitations and reach a higher level of existence. By living in accordance with our own will and creating our own values, we can overcome the restrictions of traditional morality and society and achieve a more authentic, richer, and more purposeful life. The will to power is not just a selfish or destructive force, but a creative force that drives us to live fully, to challenge norms, and to create something new and meaningful. Conclusion of the chapter. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche invites us to recognize the fundamental force that drives our actions and decisions. The will to power is not a desire to dominate others, but a deep impulse towards self-affirmation, self-improvement, and the creation of meaning in our lives. True freedom and authenticity are only achieved when we embrace our will to power and live in accordance with our own values and desires. In the next chapter, The Ideal of the Superman, we will explore in greater depth the concept of the Superman, the ideal that Nietzsche proposes as the ultimate goal of self-liberation and human development. Chapter 8. The Ideal of the Superman. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Friedrich Nietzsche presents one of the best-known and most transcendental concepts of his philosophy, the Übermensch or Superman. Throughout this chapter, Nietzsche sets out his vision of the Superman as a human ideal, not in the sense of unattainable perfection, but as a model of existence in which the individual has overcome the limitations of conventional morality and has reached his maximum potential in terms of self-definition, power, and creativity. The Superman as the overcoming of the common man. Nietzsche introduces the Superman not as a supernatural or divine figure, but as an overcoming of the common man. The Superman is the individual who has transcended the limitations imposed by traditional morality, the values of society, and external expectations. Instead of living according to imposed norms, the Superman creates his own values and lives according to his will to power. The Superman is, therefore, an autonomous individual who has freed himself from the chains of conformism, of Christian morality, and of the social restrictions that have conditioned humanity for centuries. It is not a question of mystical perfection, but of a being who has reached his maximum human potential by accepting his nature, his instincts, and his desires without guilt or repression. The Superman as a creator of values. One of the defining characteristics of the Superman is his ability to be a creator of values. While most people submit to the values established by society, religion, or tradition, the Superman has the ability to create his own morality, a morality based on his own will to power. The Superman is not a follower of the traditional values of compassion, humility, and submission, but creates new values that align with his desire for personal affirmation, power, and self-transcendence. Nietzsche argues that human beings must stop being simple followers of rules and learn to be creators of their own values. Instead of passively accepting what is given to us as good or as bad, the Superman has the capacity to redefine what it means to live well, based on his personal experience, his instincts, and his understanding of life. The Superman and the overcoming of nihilism. One of the fundamental themes in Nietzsche's philosophy is nihilism, the belief that life has no intrinsic purpose or objective value. Nietzsche sees nihilism as a consequence of the decline of traditional beliefs, especially the death of God in Western culture. For Nietzsche, nihilism can lead to despair and a lack of meaning in life. However, the Superman is the answer to nihilism. The Superman is someone who has overcome nihilism by creating his own purpose and meaning in life. Instead of falling into despair at the apparent lack of a universal purpose, the Superman embraces the freedom to create a personal meaning for his existence. The Superman's ability to affirm life despite the absence of a transcendental purpose is what makes him a model of authentic and fulfilling life. Superman and the love of life. Nietzsche describes the Superman as an individual who loves life in its totality, with all its contradictory and often chaotic aspects. Instead of escaping from suffering or trying to achieve an idealized existence, the Superman embraces life as it is, with its moments of pain, joy, struggle, and triumph. This attitude of affirmation of life is what allows the Superman to achieve a full and meaningful life. Love of life is, for Nietzsche, one of the key components of the Superman. This is not a life without difficulties, but a life that faces suffering with courage and determination. The Superman does not seek to avoid suffering, but faces it with the conviction that through suffering he can grow and be transformed. This love of life does not just imply passive acceptance, but an active commitment to life itself, an affirmation of existence in all its complexity. The Superman as a model of self-sufficiency. Another key characteristic of the Superman is his self-sufficiency. While many people depend on external validation, the Superman does not need the approval of others to feel fulfilled. The Superman has achieved emotional and psychological independence and lives according to his own principles, without needing social approval. This self-sufficiency does not imply selfishness or isolation, but rather the capacity to live authentically and true to oneself, without being dependent on the expectations or judgments of others. The self-sufficiency of the Superman is a direct result of his ability to create his own morality and meaning in life. By not depending on external norms, the Superman can live according to his own desires and objectives, which allows him to reach a level of autonomy and authenticity that is inaccessible to those who blindly follow the rules imposed by society or religion. Superman and the challenge to traditional morality. In this chapter, Nietzsche also emphasizes that the Superman is, by nature, a challenger of traditional morality. Christian morality, with its emphasis on humility, sacrifice, and submission, is seen by Nietzsche as a slave morality that denies human instincts and the affirmation of life. The Superman, on the other hand, rejects this morality and lives according to a morality that celebrates strength, self-sufficiency, and creativity. The Superman is not a perfect being in the traditional sense, but an individual who has overcome the limitations imposed by conventional morality and has achieved a fuller and more authentic level of existence. The challenge of the Superman is to go beyond social and religious norms, to live according to his own will to power. The Superman and human evolution. Nietzsche also sees the Superman as an ideal of human evolution. He is not an isolated figure, but a model to which humanity can aspire. The Superman is the manifestation of what humanity can become when it abandons the limiting ideals of traditional morality and begins to live according to its true nature. It is an ideal to which we must aspire in order to achieve personal and collective betterment. The Superman is not a final destination, but a process of continuous transformation. Humanity must constantly strive to overcome its limitations and create a freer, more authentic, and more powerful life. In this sense, the Superman is both an ideal and a path to follow, the goal towards which humanity can evolve if it dares to embrace life in all its complexity and contradiction. Conclusion of the chapter. In the ideal of the Superman, Nietzsche presents the Superman as a model of authentic, free, and creative life. Far from being an idealized or mystical being, the Superman is an individual who has overcome the limitations of traditional morality and has reached a higher level of existence by affirming his own life and creating his own values. This ideal is not something that can be reached immediately, but a continuous process of self-discovery, self-improvement, and transformation. In the next chapter, Mind and Body, The Divided Unity, we will explore how Nietzsche reflects on the relationship between mind and body and how both aspects of our existence must be integrated to live an authentic and free life. Chapter 9. Mind and Body, The Divided Unity. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche addresses one of the most relevant and profound questions in philosophy, the relationship between mind and body, and how the division that has traditionally been made between both aspects of our existence is, for him, a source of confusion and alienation. Nietzsche proposes that the mind and the body should not be considered as separate entities, but as an integrated unit that should be understood and affirmed as a whole. This holistic vision of human nature contrasts with the dualistic conceptions that have dominated Western philosophy, especially those influenced by Plato and Christianity, which have seen the body as something inferior and the mind as something superior. The division between mind and body in the philosophical tradition. Nietzsche begins this chapter by criticizing the division that has historically existed between mind and body. Throughout Western philosophy, The body has been considered an inferior vehicle for the mind or soul, which is the divine and transcendental part of the human being. Plato, for example, saw the body as a prison for the soul, while Christianity promoted the idea that the body should be repressed and denied in favor of the spirit. This dualistic conception has led to the creation of a vision of the human being that separates the spiritual from the material, creating an artificial gap between mind and body. Nietzsche rejects this distinction and proposes that both the mind and the body are essential parts of the same whole. According to him, the body is not simply a vessel for the mind, but an integral part of our existence that must be affirmed and respected. The separation between mind and body, in his opinion, has led to the alienation and repression of human nature, as it forces us to live in an unbalanced way, rejecting the natural needs and desires of the body in favor of abstract and transcendental ideals. The body as the basis of life, and the mind. Nietzsche argues that the body should be seen as the basis of all life, thought, and action. The mind, far from being a separate and superior entity, is deeply connected to the body, and the thoughts, desires, and emotions we experience are rooted in our physical nature. The body, with its instincts, desires, and needs, is the foundation upon which our experience of life is built, and the mind is simply a tool that the body uses to understand, process, and act in the world. This materialist view of human existence is opposed to idealistic conceptions that see the body as secondary or even negative. For Nietzsche, the body is sacred in the sense that it is the source of our vitality and creativity. Rejection of the body, or the repression of its desires and passions, only leads to the denial of life itself. The true affirmation of life is only possible when we accept and value both the body and the mind as interdependent parts of our existence. Integrating mind and body for a full life. Nietzsche argues that harmony between mind and body is essential for living an authentic and fulfilling life. The division between these two aspects of our nature has caused a disconnect that is reflected in many of the psychological and existential problems we face today. The internal tension between what we think and what we feel, between what we desire and what we believe we should do, is often the result of this division. The integration of mind and body involves accepting our passions, desires, and emotions as a natural part of our humanity. It is not about suppressing or denying the body in favor of abstract ideals, but about finding a balance in which the mind and body work together to achieve a life of fulfillment and meaning. This integration allows us to live more authentically, as we are not fighting against our nature, but flowing with it in a creative and constructive way. The body and the will to power. The concept of the will to power is also closely linked to the relationship between mind and body. The will to power, as a fundamental force in human life, is not limited to the mind alone, but is also expressed through the body. Physical impulses and desires are manifestations of the will to power, and the mind must learn to channel and direct this energy in a productive way. Nietzsche asserts that the will to power should not be seen only as a desire to dominate others, but as an impulse towards the affirmation of life in its totality. This affirmation of life includes both the expression of physical desires and the creation of meanings and values on an intellectual and emotional level. The will to power, therefore, is an integral force that encompasses both body and mind, and that must be understood and directed towards the creation of a fuller and more meaningful life. The importance of physical and mental health. Nietzsche also highlights the importance of physical and mental health for the fulfillment of the human being. Authentic life and the affirmation of the will to power can only be achieved when the body and mind are in balance and function harmoniously. Health, for Nietzsche, is not just the absence of disease, but a state of vitality and energy that allows the individual to act with power and creativity. Attention to physical health should not be seen as a secondary task or something that is done only to achieve a moral or spiritual ideal, but as a necessary condition for human flourishing. Physical health is a reflection of our ability to live fully, and for Nietzsche, health is a value that must be cultivated with the same dedication and attention given to intellectual or emotional development. The body and creativity. In relation to creativity, Nietzsche emphasizes how the body is a vital source of inspiration and expression. Creativity is not limited to rational thought or abstract reflection, but is also deeply connected to the physical, emotional, and sensory experiences of the body. Imagination, poetry, art, and philosophy are products of the interaction between mind and body, and creativity flourishes when both aspects of our nature are integrated in a harmonious way. The repression of the body, therefore, not only limits our capacity to live a full life, but also hinders our creative capacity. The body must be recognized as an essential medium for creation, and the freedom to express our passions and desires is fundamental for creativity to flourish. Life as a holistic process. In conclusion, Nietzsche presents us with a vision of life as a holistic process in which the mind and the body must work together to achieve an authentic and free existence. The traditional division between mind and body has created a disconnect that limits our ability to live fully, but by integrating these two aspects of our nature, we can achieve greater vitality, creativity, and freedom. True affirmation of life is only possible when we accept both body and mind as fundamental parts of our existence, and when we use both to create a life full of purpose and meaning. Mind and body, far from being opposites, are complementary, and their integration is the key to self-liberation and personal fulfillment. In the next chapter, Art as a Form of Transgression, we will explore how art, for Nietzsche, is one of the most powerful ways of transgressing social norms and expressing the affirmation of life in its entirety. Chapter 10. Art as a Form of Transgression. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche reflects on the role of art in human life, especially in relation to transgression and the overcoming of social norms. Throughout his work, Nietzsche has been a strong advocate of creativity and self-affirmation as essential means for human fulfillment, and art, in his vision, is not only an aesthetic activity, but a powerful way to transgress the limitations imposed by society, morality, and tradition. Through art, human beings can free themselves from the conventions that limit their creativity and their ability to live an authentic life. Art as an act of affirmation of life. For Nietzsche, art is not just a form of beauty or entertainment, but a radical affirmation of life. Art is, in many senses, the means through which the individual can express their will to power, their vital impulse to create, transform, and overcome the limitations of human existence. Art allows the individual to transcend social, moral, and religious restrictions, and to create something that reflects their personal vision of the world, without being conditioned by external norms. The affirmation of life through art implies embracing the totality of the human experience, including the shadows, the suffering, and the contradictions. Nietzsche argues that art should not be an escape from reality, but a way of confronting it in all its complexity. By creating or experiencing art, the individual can rediscover and reaffirm their power to create meaning in a world that, according to Nietzsche, lacks intrinsic purpose. Art, then, becomes a vehicle for the transcendence of the mundane, a way of transforming the difficulties of life into creative expression. Transgression as an essential characteristic of art. Nietzsche sees transgression as an essential component of art. Instead of following social rules and conventions, artists have the ability to challenge norms, explore the forbidden, and create something completely new. Art, for Nietzsche, is a way of breaking with the established, of going beyond the limitations that society imposes on what is acceptable or desirable. This ability to transgress the norms is seen as a form of creative liberation. Through transgression, art allows the individual to explore unknown territories and discover new ways of thinking, feeling, and living. This ability to go beyond what is permitted is the essence of artistic creativity, and it is also a manifestation of the will to power. Art is not limited to reproducing reality as it is, but transforms, molds, and redefines it, challenging existing structures. Art as a form of self-liberation. Nietzsche also emphasizes that art has a profound liberating power in a personal sense. The act of creating art, or even of being an active recipient of art, can help the individual to free themselves from the restrictions of conventional morality and external authority. Artistic creation allows the individual to express their true will, their deepest desires, and their most authentic thoughts. Through art, human beings can free themselves from the oppressive influence of traditional morality, which promotes submission and the denial of life in favor of abstract ideals such as sacrifice and humility. Art offers a refuge of freedom where the individual can experiment and explore life without the restrictions of society. The practice of art can be seen, then, as an act of self-liberation in which the individual moves away from the expectations of others and allows themselves to express themselves fully. In doing so, art not only liberates the creator, but also those who experience the work, as it offers them new ways of seeing the world and of understanding their own existence. The connection between art and the will to power. Nietzsche sees art and the will to power as deeply connected concepts. The will to power, as a fundamental force in human life, manifests itself in art as the desire to transform reality, to create something new and meaningful. The artist, like the individual who lives according to his will to power, is a person who seeks to transcend the limits of the existing and create new forms of life, new forms of expression, and new meanings. Art is, in this sense, a way of affirming life, a way of resisting the forces that try to limit or control the individual. Instead of being a form of escapism, art becomes a means of confronting and transforming reality, of facing suffering and contradiction with courage and creativity. The artist, like the individual who follows his will to power, must be willing to create his own reality, rather than being content with what has been given to him. The function of art in society. Nietzsche also reflects on the role of art in society in general. Rather than seeing art as an isolated or trivial activity, Nietzsche considers it an essential means for human progress. Art is a form of social criticism, a way of challenging existing power structures and questioning established norms. Through art, artists have the power to influence the collective consciousness, to provoke reflection and change, and to offer new ways of seeing and living life. Art has the capacity to inspire and motivate people to free themselves from the limitations imposed by conventional morality and dominant culture. By transgressing social norms, art offers a path to collective self-liberation, in which people can begin to see life in a different way, rethink their values, and question the beliefs that have governed their lives for centuries. The duality between the tragic and the sublime in art. Nietzsche also reflects on the tension between the tragic and the sublime in art. In his philosophy, both are necessary expressions of the affirmation of life. The tragic is a representation of the struggle, suffering, and contradiction inherent in human existence, while the sublime reflects the individual's ability to rise above these struggles and reach a form of beauty or creation that transcends the human condition. Art, according to Nietzsche, should be capable of containing both the tragic and the sublime, as both aspects are essential for the full affirmation of life. By integrating both elements, art reflects the complexity of human existence, showing both the despair and the possibility of overcoming it, offering a complete and authentic vision of life. Conclusion of the chapter. In art as a form of transgression, Nietzsche offers us a vision of art as a means of creative liberation and self-liberation. Far from being simply an aesthetic activity, art is a form of resistance to the restrictions imposed by society, morality, and religion, and a vehicle for the affirmation of life. Through transgression and the creation of new values, art allows the individual to transcend the limitations of the ordinary world and live authentically and meaningfully. Art, for Nietzsche, is a vital tool for self-discovery and creation, a way of facing life with courage, creativity, and love for existence in its totality. Through art, both the creator and the spectator can experience the will to power, creating and transforming reality according to their personal vision. In the next chapter, Science and Disillusionment, we will explore the role of science in modern society and how, in some cases, it can contribute to a disillusioned and meaningless worldview. Chapter 11. Science and Disillusionment. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche reflects on the role of science in modern society and its impact on the way we understand the world and our existence. While Nietzsche recognizes the importance of science in improving human life in practical terms, he also points out how its rationalist and empiricist approach can lead to a disillusioned and reductionist view of life. Throughout this chapter, Nietzsche examines the tensions between science and the sense of meaning and purpose in human life, and how science, in its quest for objectivity and absolute truth, can strip existence of its emotional richness and depth. Science as a crucial but limited advance. Nietzsche begins this chapter by acknowledging the achievements of science in modern society, especially in its ability to improve the quality of material life through advances in medicine, technology, and the understanding of the physical world. Science, for Nietzsche, has been a liberating force in many ways, as it has allowed human beings to free themselves from the superstitions and myths that have governed pre-modern societies. In this sense, science has challenged the traditional worldview and provided a more precise and detailed understanding of natural phenomena. However, Nietzsche also warns that science, by focusing exclusively on the observable and the measurable, has inherent limitations. While science can unravel the mysteries of the physical universe, it cannot, according to Nietzsche, address the deeper aspects of human existence, such as the meaning of life, the creation of values, or the affirmation of life as a whole. Science, in its eagerness to strip the world of its mystery, can make human existence feel empty, deprived of purpose and meaning. The disillusionment caused by the scientific approach. One of Nietzsche's most important criticisms of science is its capacity to induce disillusionment in humanity. By focusing on unraveling the physical and causal laws of the universe, science often offers a vision of the world that lacks the marvelous and the transcendental. Science, according to Nietzsche, offers us a vision of the world as a purposeless machine, where human beings are just a product of biological and social causes. This vision of the world, although useful for the technical understanding of phenomena, can strip life of any deep or spiritual meaning. Instead of seeing life as an experience full of meaning and beauty, the scientific approach can lead to a mechanistic and materialistic view of the world, where everything is determined by natural laws and where there is no room for freedom, creativity, or personal purpose. For Nietzsche, this disillusioned view of life is one of the most negative consequences of the rise of science in modern society. The sacrifice of mystery and transcendence. Nietzsche also points out that, in seeking definitive answers through science, human beings sacrifice part of the mystery and transcendence that gives depth and value to life. Science, in trying to reduce everything to comprehensible categories, can eliminate what Nietzsche considers to be the most valuable part of human experience: the capacity for wonder, the search for the unknown, and the feeling of greatness that comes from the inexplicable. Science, in its quest to explain everything, can eliminate the sense of mystery that gives meaning to life. In seeking absolute truth, science also strips the world of its plurality and complexity. Nietzsche argues that this search for objective and definitive truth is reductive, as it simplifies the richness of human experience and turns it into something that can be classified, measured, and understood. For Nietzsche, mystery and the inexplicable are fundamental to the human experience, as they connect us to the grandeur of existence and allow us to face life with an attitude of affirmation and creation. Science versus value creation. Another important point that Nietzsche addresses in this chapter is the relationship between science and the creation of values. While science focuses on discovering objective facts about the natural world, the creation of values is a profoundly human process involving the will to power, creativity, and self-definition. Science, in its mechanistic approach, cannot provide the values and meanings that individuals need to live authentically and fully. For Nietzsche, values are not something that can be found through science, but must be created by the individual through their will and their capacity to transcend the limitations imposed by traditional morality and society. Science, by focusing on what is real and objective, cannot address what is created by human beings, that is to say, values, passions, art, and the affirmation of life. A disillusioned worldview and nihilism. By offering a vision of the world as a soulless mechanism, Science also contributes to the nihilism that Nietzsche identifies as an existential crisis of modern society. Nihilism arises when transcendental beliefs, such as religion or traditional morality, lose their force and can no longer offer an ultimate purpose for human life. Science, by reducing everything to the physical and the quantifiable, contributes to this vacuum of meaning, as it offers no answers to existential questions about the purpose of life or the nature of reality beyond the material. Nietzsche sees nihilism as a fundamental challenge for humanity, since by losing belief in a transcendental or divine purpose, the individual is faced with a life that is apparently empty and without direction. For Nietzsche, the solution to nihilism is not simply a return to religion or traditional beliefs, but a new way of creating meaning through the will to power and the creation of values. Science as a tool, not as absolute truth. Despite his criticisms, Nietzsche does not reject science completely. He recognizes that science has an important value as a tool for understanding the physical world and improving our living conditions. Science can help us solve practical problems, develop technology, and gain a deeper knowledge of natural laws. However, Nietzsche warns against the temptation to see science as the last word on reality, as if it could provide a total and definitive vision of life. Science, for Nietzsche, should be seen as a tool that we can use to improve our material life, but not as the only path to meaning and purpose. The true meaning of life, according to Nietzsche, is not found in the laws of physics or scientific evidence, but in the human capacity to create meaning, to affirm life, and to live authentically. Conclusion of the chapter. In Science and Disillusionment, Nietzsche warns us about the dangers of seeing science as the only source of truth and meaning. Although he recognizes the importance of science in understanding the physical world, he also points out that its limited focus can lead to a disillusioned and mechanistic view of life. Science, by reducing reality to the measurable and quantifiable, eliminates the mystery, transcendence, and creativity that make human life meaningful. Nietzsche invites us to embrace science as a useful tool, but also to create our own values and meanings through the will to power, self-liberation, and the affirmation of life. Only in this way can we overcome nihilism and live authentically and fully, recognizing that the true purpose of life is not found in natural laws, but in our capacity to create and transform our own existence. In the next chapter, The Sense of Despair, we will explore how suffering and despair can be seen as an integral part of the human experience, and how, through self-knowledge and self-improvement, we can transcend these feelings to live a richer and more meaningful life. Chapter 12. The Sense of Despair. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche addresses one of the most universal human experiences, despair. Throughout his philosophy, Nietzsche recognizes that suffering and despair are inevitable aspects of human existence, but he also considers them as catalysts for growth and transformation. Instead of seeing despair as an insurmountable obstacle, Nietzsche presents it as an opportunity to affirm life and overcome the limitations imposed by social expectations, traditional morality, and the fear of suffering. Despair as a natural consequence of life. Nietzsche begins this chapter by reflecting on how despair arises as a natural response to the difficulties of life. Living in a world marked by uncertainty, suffering, and finitude, it is inevitable that human beings will face moments of despair. Death, betrayal, personal failure, and physical and emotional pain are just some of the experiences that can lead us to a state of despair. However, Nietzsche also points out that despair is not an exclusively negative experience. Instead of trying to avoid or repress it, we should face it head-on, recognizing that suffering is part of life and that facing it bravely can lead to positive transformation. Despair is not a sign of weakness, but a sign that we are deeply committed to life, with all its challenges and contradictions. Confronting despair as a means of self-liberation. Nietzsche argues that the real challenge in life is not to avoid despair, but to learn to face it and transcend it. Facing despair becomes a form of self-liberation, as it forces us to question our beliefs, our expectations, and our values. By experiencing despair, we are forced to rethink what really matters in life, to face our deepest fears, and to find ways to overcome the internal obstacles that prevent us from living fully. This process of self-liberation is neither easy nor comfortable, but it is essential for personal growth. Instead of seeing despair as a condition to be avoided at all costs, Nietzsche invites us to see it as an opportunity to assert ourselves, to discover new ways of living, and to create our own values in the midst of adversity. Despair and nihilism. Nietzsche connects despair with nihilism, the feeling that life lacks meaning or purpose. Nihilism can be seen as a form of existential despair, a response to the loss of transcendental values or the death of traditional beliefs. In modern society, many people face a crisis of meaning due to the dissolution of the religions and ideologies that had provided purpose and meaning to life. The despair that arises from nihilism should not be seen as a condemnation to impotence or hopelessness, but rather as an awakening to the freedom to create our own values. Nietzsche argues that although life may lack a predetermined purpose, this does not imply that it lacks value. On the contrary, it is precisely the absence of a universal purpose that gives us the freedom to create meaning and live in accordance with our own aspirations. Despair as an impulse towards self-transformation. Nietzsche sees despair as a force that can propel us towards self-transformation. When faced with despair, we have two options. We can succumb to hopelessness and inaction, or we can use that pain as a means to grow and create ourselves. Despair, in this sense, is not the end of life, but the beginning of a new way of being. It forces us to question our deepest values and beliefs, and invites us to create something new out of our own experience. By facing despair with courage, the individual can reach a higher level of self-understanding and self-liberation. This process involves a revaluation of what we consider important in life and the ability to transform painful experiences into sources of personal power and creativity. Despair can be seen, in this context, as the fertile ground from which a new, richer, and more authentic form of existence can emerge. Overcoming despair through the affirmation of life. Nietzsche argues that the most effective way to overcome despair is through the affirmation of life. Instead of succumbing to or escaping from despair, we should accept suffering as an integral part of life and learn to live fully in spite of it. The affirmation of life implies a radical acceptance of what is, without trying to avoid or deny difficulties. Life, in all its complexity and contradiction, should be embraced in its entirety, and it is precisely through this acceptance that we can transcend despair. The affirmation of life does not mean passively resigning oneself to difficulties, but rather facing them with an active and creative attitude. In affirming life, the individual faces suffering and uncertainty with courage, turning these challenges into opportunities for growth and self-transcendence. In this process, despair becomes a transformative force that propels us towards a greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us. The freedom that arises from despair. Finally, Nietzsche highlights that despair can be a source of freedom. When faced with despair, the individual is freed from the illusions and expectations imposed by society, traditional morality, or religious beliefs. This liberation is a form of self-determination in which the individual can create their own values and find their own purpose in life. Despair, in this sense, becomes a means to achieve greater personal freedom and authentic existence. The real challenge is not to avoid despair, but to learn to use it as a tool for self-liberation and affirmation of life. By accepting despair as part of the human condition, we can transcend it and find a deeper form of meaning and purpose in our existence. Conclusion of the chapter. In the sense of the supreme, Nietzsche shows us how despair, far from being an insurmountable obstacle, can be an opportunity for growth and self-liberation. Through despair, the individual has the possibility of questioning his values, transcending his limitations, and creating a new meaning in life. By affirming life in its totality, with its light and its shadows, we can overcome despair and live more authentically and meaningfully. In the next chapter, The Ethics of Self-Criticism, we will explore the importance of self-criticism in the process of personal growth and how the ability to question our own beliefs and values is fundamental to achieving a life of freedom and creativity. Chapter 13. The ethics of self-criticism. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche delves deeper into the concept of self-criticism, which for him is an essential tool for personal growth and self-transformation. Self-criticism, in its deepest sense, not only involves the evaluation of our actions and thoughts, but also a continuous process of questioning and reevaluating our beliefs, values, and principles. Throughout this chapter, Nietzsche shows us how the practice of self-criticism can free us from the limitations imposed by social norms and traditional morality, and how it can be a means to achieve a more authentic and powerful life. Self-criticism as a liberating virtue. Nietzsche begins this chapter by emphasizing that self-criticism is not simply a form of punishment or self-devaluation, but a liberating virtue. The ability to question our own beliefs and values is what allows us to free ourselves from external restrictions and live according to our own principles. Self-criticism, in this sense, is a form of self-liberation, as it allows us to challenge inherited values and redefine our own morality. Through self-criticism, the individual confronts their own weaknesses, prejudices, and limitations, and has the opportunity to overcome them. Nietzsche argues that this form of self-knowledge is essential for the development of an authentic life, as it allows us to live more consciously and freely, without being trapped in repetitive patterns of thought or behavior that do not reflect our true aspirations. The fight against inherited values. One of Nietzsche's main criticisms of modern society is how individuals live under the influence of inherited values that have not been questioned or examined. These values, which come from religion, traditional morality, or culture, are imposed externally and limit our ability to live according to our will to power. Self-criticism, according to Nietzsche, is a way of breaking with these inherited values and taking control of our own lives. Traditional morality, which promotes values such as humility, submission, and sacrifice, has historically been a form of oppression. By living according to these values without questioning them, the individual renounces their freedom and their ability to create meaning in their life. Self-criticism is the process that allows the individual to free themselves from these imposed values, confronting the beliefs and principles that they have accepted without reflection and reevaluating them through their own will and experience. Self-criticism as a means to overcome conformism. Nietzsche also analyzes how self-criticism is essential to overcome social conformism. Most people live in accordance with society's expectations, adapting to the norms and roles imposed on them without question. Conformity, in his opinion, is one of the main sources of alienation and suffering in human life. By conforming to what others expect of us, we lose our ability to be authentic and to follow our own path. Self-criticism, then, becomes a form of rebellion against conformism. It is the process through which the individual frees himself from social pressure and begins to live in a more autonomous and creative way. Self-criticism allows us to examine our decisions and behaviors, question whether we are really living in accordance with our own desires and goals, and, if necessary, make the necessary changes to align ourselves with our true nature. The importance of self-acceptance in self-criticism. Despite the importance of self-criticism, Nietzsche also points out that it must be accompanied by a process of self-acceptance. Self-criticism should not be a tool for self-destruction or blame, but a means to improve and evolve. Constant self-criticism can become a form of psychological torture if it is not balanced with acceptance of who we are in the present moment. Self-criticism should therefore be a constructive tool that helps us to affirm ourselves rather than weaken us. As we face our weaknesses, mistakes, and limitations, we should also recognize our strengths and achievements. Self-acceptance allows us to see our flaws as opportunities for growth, not as absolute failures. It is through this balance between criticism and acceptance that we can move towards a fuller and more authentic life. The risk of excessive self-criticism. Nietzsche also warns about the danger of excessive or destructive self-criticism. Self-criticism should not become a form of constant self-accusation, in which the individual perceives themselves as insufficient or defective. If not carried out in a balanced way, self-criticism can lead the individual to psychological self-flagellation, in which guilt and shame replace creativity and the will to power. The objective of self-criticism, according to Nietzsche, is to identify and overcome our weaknesses, not to sink into despair. Self-criticism should be a liberating, not an oppressive, process and should help us to live more authentically and strongly, not more weakened or guilt-ridden. The key is to use self-criticism for personal growth, not for self-destruction. Self-criticism as a path to individuality. Finally, Nietzsche argues that self-criticism is essential for the development of individuality. Through the process of questioning our beliefs, values, and actions, we come closer to a greater understanding of ourselves and what we really want from life. Self-criticism allows us to free ourselves from external expectations and live according to our own will, which is essential for developing our authenticity and our ability to be our own masters. The real challenge of self-criticism is not only to see our limitations, but to transcend them and create new paths for our lives. Self-criticism, when done properly, is a process of self-creation in which the individual redefines himself and becomes the architect of his own destiny. Conclusion of the chapter. In the ethics of self-criticism, Nietzsche presents self-criticism as an essential tool for self-liberation and personal growth. By questioning our beliefs, values, and behaviors, we can free ourselves from the restrictions imposed by society and traditional morality and begin to live more authentically and powerfully. However, this practice must be accompanied by self-acceptance and balance to avoid falling into despair or self-destruction. Self-criticism is, for Nietzsche, a form of affirmation of life, as it allows us to face our weaknesses and limitations in a constructive way, transforming them into opportunities for creation and improvement. Through this process, we can develop our individuality and live in accordance with our true will. In the next chapter, The Power of Individuality, we will explore how the ability to be truly individual is one of the most powerful forces in the search for freedom and authenticity. Chapter 14. The Power of Individuality. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche delves deeper into the concept of individuality as one of the most fundamental forces for the affirmation of life and true freedom. For Nietzsche, being a genuine individual does not simply mean being distinct or unique in a superficial sense, but having the capacity to affirm oneself as an autonomous, independent being and creator of values. Individuality, in its deepest sense, implies a break with the conformism and mediocrity of society and the capacity to live in accordance with one's own will, without submitting to external expectations or imposed norms. Individuality as resistance to conformity. Nietzsche begins this chapter by pointing out that individuality is, in many cases, a form of resistance to social and cultural pressures. Society, according to Nietzsche, tends to homogenize people, to impose roles and expectations on them that distance them from their true nature. Most people live according to the values and norms of society, without questioning or reconsidering them, and this prevents them from developing fully as individuals. True individuality, in this sense, is not simply a way of superficially standing out from others, but the ability to assert oneself as a unique and autonomous being who does not depend on external validation. This type of individuality is an act of rebellion against social conformism, as it challenges the norms that seek to homogenize and control people. Individuality and the creation of values. For Nietzsche, individuality is closely linked to the capacity to create values. Traditional morality and social values are imposed from outside, and most people accept them without question. However, the true individual is one who creates their own morality, their own principles, and their own meaning of life. Individuality, in this sense, implies the capacity to define what is important to us, to establish our own priorities, and to live in accordance with our own aspirations, instead of blindly following society's expectations. Nietzsche sees the creation of values as one of the highest expressions of individuality. Instead of being simply a passive recipient of social norms, the authentic individual is an active creator who redefines what it means to live well. Individuality, then, is not just a question of separation or distinction, but of creation and self-determination. Individuality versus traditional morality. One of the most relevant aspects of individuality in Nietzsche's philosophy is its relationship with traditional morality. Conventional morality, which is based on values such as humility, obedience, and submission has historically been a way of suppressing individuality. According to Nietzsche, this morality has been designed to control and repress the will to power, the creative capacity, and the autonomy of the individual. By following these rules, people are forced to deny their true nature, to submit to a morality that does not reflect their most authentic desires, passions, and aspirations. Individuality, for Nietzsche, implies an overcoming of traditional morality. Instead of submitting to external values, the authentic individual creates his or her own morality, based on his or her will and on his or her capacity to affirm life. True individual morality is that which promotes self-sufficiency, creativity, and the affirmation of life in all its complexity. Individuality and authentic freedom. Nietzsche links individuality with authentic freedom, which is not simply the absence of external restrictions, but the capacity to live in accordance with our own will, without being conditioned by social norms or the expectations of others. Authentic freedom, according to Nietzsche, can only be achieved through the affirmation of individuality. The truly free individual does not submit to social conventions, but lives according to their own principles and desires, creating a unique and personal path through life. Freedom, in this sense, is not an abstract or theoretical freedom, but a practical freedom that manifests itself in the ability to make decisions autonomously and to live according to our own beliefs and values. Individuality is the key to this authentic freedom, as it allows us to escape the chains of conformism and the external expectations that limit us. Individuality and human greatness. Nietzsche also associates individuality with human greatness. For him, true greatness is not the result of conformity to the standards of society, but the ability to create a unique life, to transcend limitations, and to affirm life in a powerful and autonomous way. Individuality is what allows people to reach their full potential, overcome their fears and limitations, and live with a sense of purpose and authenticity. Human greatness, for Nietzsche, is not measured by wealth, social status, or external power, but by an individual's ability to affirm their life fully and creatively. Individuality is the basis of this greatness, as it allows each human being to be the master of their own destiny and to act according to their own will to power. Solitude and individuality. Nietzsche also reflects on the relationship between solitude and individuality. For the philosopher, solitude is not a negative or desolate state, but an opportunity to find oneself. True individuality can only develop in solitude, as it is in this private space that the individual has the freedom to question their beliefs, challenge social norms, and redefine their life according to their own desires and aspirations. Solitude, according to Nietzsche, is a tool for self-liberation. By being away from social influences and external pressures, we can have the space and clarity to examine our lives and make more authentic decisions. Solitude, in this sense, is a way of strengthening individuality, as it allows the individual to focus on their own development without distractions or impositions. The danger of conformity in modern society. Nietzsche also points out that modern society represents a great challenge to individuality. Social norms and expectations are becoming stronger, and people tend to lose themselves in the crowd, to adopt dominant beliefs and behaviors without question. Modern society promotes conformity and mediocrity, and as a result, many people abandon their true individuality in favor of social acceptance. The danger of conformity is that it leads us to live a superficial and empty life, without true purpose or authenticity. Nietzsche warns against this danger, urging people to resist social pressure and to strive for autonomy and originality. True individuality can only emerge when we dare to challenge imposed norms and expectations and live according to our own will. Conclusion of the chapter. In The Power of Individuality, Nietzsche emphasizes the importance of truly being oneself in a world that constantly pressures us to conform. Individuality is the basis of true freedom, creativity, and human greatness. By living according to our own will to power, we can overcome the limitations imposed by society and traditional morality and create a unique and authentic life. The struggle for individuality is, according to Nietzsche, a struggle for authenticity and self-improvement, and is the path to a full and meaningful life. In the next chapter, Practical Wisdom, Living According to Nature, we will explore how living in harmony with our own nature and the laws of the world around us can lead us to a richer and more fulfilling existence. Chapter 15, Practical Wisdom, Living According to Nature. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche delves into the concept of practical wisdom, which for him is the key to living an authentic, balanced, and powerful life. To live according to nature implies being in harmony with our own inner nature, our instincts, desires, and aspirations, as well as with the natural laws that govern the world. For Nietzsche, this way of life is not in contradiction with reason or culture, but is a return to the most genuine and profound part of our existence, free from the false restrictions imposed by traditional morality or social expectations. Living in harmony with our inner nature. Nietzsche begins this chapter by emphasizing that true wisdom is not found in the passive acceptance of external norms, but in the ability to live in accordance with our own nature. To live according to nature means to accept our passions, desires, and emotions as an integral part of who we are, instead of repressing them or trying to deny them. Human beings must learn to listen to their will to power, to recognize their instincts, and to direct them in a creative and constructive way. For Nietzsche, human instincts are not something to be feared or repressed, but vital forces which, when properly channeled, allow us to live more fully and authentically. Practical wisdom, then, consists of embracing who we are in its totality, not running away from our deepest desires, but using them as a source of energy and creativity. Rejection of traditional morality. A fundamental part of practical wisdom is the ability to free oneself from the traditional morality imposed by religion, culture, and society. Nietzsche strongly criticizes the moral norms that dictate what is good and bad, arguing that these norms often limit the true affirmation of life. Instead of blindly following the dictates of conventional morality, Nietzsche urges the individual to question these beliefs and to live according to their own judgment and their own understanding of what is good for them. Traditional morality, which promotes values such as humility, sacrifice, and submission, often goes against the natural instincts of human beings. According to Nietzsche, living according to nature involves transcending these restrictive values and creating a personal morality that celebrates life, power, creativity, and self-improvement. Living in harmony with the natural world. Practical wisdom is not limited to the relationship with oneself, but also involves living in harmony with the natural world around us. Nietzsche argues that human life must be understood in the context of nature as a whole. Living according to nature means accepting our position within the natural order, recognizing our limitations as finite beings, but also our ability to transcend those limitations through will and action. The relationship with nature, for Nietzsche, is not a question of passive submission, but of active affirmation. Nature should not be seen as something to be feared or dominated, but as a force to be understood and respected. By living in harmony with natural laws, we can use our energies more effectively, aligning our will with the flows of the world instead of fighting against them. Practical wisdom and authenticity. Nietzsche also links practical wisdom with authenticity. To live in accordance with our nature does not mean to live in a selfish or superficial way, but to live in an authentic and genuine way, being true to ourselves and to our deepest aspirations. Authenticity, in this sense, implies the capacity to live without masks or falsehoods, without trying to comply with social expectations or norms that do not reflect our true nature. Authenticity is a form of self-liberation, as it allows us to free ourselves from the restrictions imposed by culture and morality. For Nietzsche, the authentic person is one who has attained the capacity to live according to their own judgment and will, without depending on external validation or the judgments of others. Practical wisdom and self-affirmation. A central aspect of practical wisdom is self-affirmation, which is the process of recognizing and affirming our own desires and abilities. Nietzsche argues that true wisdom is found in the ability to live fully, to affirm our existence in all its facets, without fear of suffering or failure. Self-affirmation implies embracing life as it is, with its joys and sorrows, and finding meaning in every experience. Practical wisdom also involves taking responsibility for our life and our decisions, taking control of our destiny. Instead of living under the domination of social expectations or imposed beliefs, the wise person is one who has freed themselves from external influences and lives according to their own will to power. Practical wisdom and personal transformation. Nietzsche also links practical wisdom to the concept of personal transformation. Living according to nature is not just a question of passively accepting what we are, but an active process of creation and self-improvement. Practical wisdom implies the ability to transform our limitations and weaknesses into strengths that drive us to grow and evolve. Through self-affirmation, we can create a richer and more meaningful life, overcoming the internal and external barriers that prevent us from reaching our full potential. This process of personal transformation is neither easy nor quick, but it is essential for living authentically and fully. Practical wisdom requires a willingness to face life's challenges with courage and creativity, to redefine what it means to be human, and to create a unique path to self-realization. Conclusion of the chapter. In Practical Wisdom, Living According to Nature, Nietzsche invites us to live in harmony with our true nature, to embrace our instincts and desires as a source of power and creativity, and to free ourselves from the restrictions of traditional morality. Practical wisdom implies the ability to live authentically, affirming our life and taking responsibility for our destiny. By living according to nature, we can achieve greater self-sufficiency, creativity, and freedom, transforming our limitations into opportunities for personal growth. In the next chapter, Nihilism, the void in human life, we will explore how nihilism arises in modern society and how Nietzsche proposes to overcome this crisis of meaning through the creation of personal values and the affirmation of life. Chapter 16, Nihilism, the void in human life. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche addresses one of the most complex and profound themes of his philosophy, nihilism. Nihilism, for Nietzsche, is the feeling that life lacks intrinsic purpose, value, or meaning. This existential void is a consequence of the dissolution of traditional beliefs, especially religion, which for centuries had provided a framework of meaning and purpose in human life. In modern society, Nietzsche sees nihilism as a fundamental challenge for humanity, as the lack of a transcendental purpose has left many individuals lost, disconnected, and trapped in an existential void. The origin of nihilism, the death of God. Nietzsche begins this chapter by reflecting on the death of God, one of the most famous ideas in his work. The death of God should not be understood literally, but as a metaphor for the disappearance of the religious and transcendental beliefs that had sustained the meaning of life in Western societies. With the decline of religion and Christian morality, human beings are faced with a vacuum of values, a space where absolute and universal beliefs have lost their force. The death of God is, in a way, the main cause of nihilism. By losing faith in the divine and in a predetermined transcendental purpose, individuals are confronted with the reality that life has no inherent meaning and that they must create their own meaning through their own efforts. Nietzsche sees this transition as an existential challenge, as the disappearance of God and absolute values leaves a void that can lead to despair and a lack of direction. Nihilism as a consequence of modernity. Nietzsche also links nihilism to modernity and the social and cultural transformation that characterizes modern societies. With the advance of science, reason, and critical thinking, the old religious explanations of the world have lost their credibility. Science and rationalism have shown that the universe operates according to natural laws, without the need for divine intervention or a transcendental purpose. This has led to a growing sense that the world has no ultimate purpose or meaning beyond what human beings can make of it. Nihilism, therefore, is an inevitable consequence of intellectual and scientific progress. As humanity advances in its understanding of the world, it is confronted with the reality that there is no given purpose or predefined meaning. Life, from this perspective, becomes something accidental, where human beings must face the absence of meaning and find their own purpose without resorting to external explanations. The existential void and the crisis of meaning. For Nietzsche, nihilism is not just a philosophical or intellectual issue, but an existential crisis affecting all of humanity. The feeling that life is purposeless and that traditional values no longer make sense can lead to deep despair and alienation. The existential void that accompanies nihilism can be paralyzing, as individuals feel disconnected from a higher purpose and a moral compass to give them direction in life. Nietzsche recognizes this crisis, but instead of seeing it as a condemnation, he sees it as an opportunity for self-liberation and the creation of meaning. The absence of a transcendental purpose does not mean that life lacks value or possibilities, but that it opens up the space for the individual to create their own meaning and their own values. Nihilism, in this sense, is not an end, but a new beginning for humanity, an opportunity to forge an authentic and personal path. Overcoming nihilism, the creation of new values. The solution to nihilism, according to Nietzsche, is not to return to old religious beliefs or adopt a pre-established morality, but to create new values that reflect our true will to power and our affirmation of life. Nihilism arises when traditional values lose their power, but the creation of new values is what allows individuals to overcome despair and existential emptiness. Nietzsche sees the creation of values as one of the most powerful responses to nihilism. Instead of surrendering to the lack of meaning, the individual must take responsibility for creating the meaning of their life. This process of value creation is not something external or imposed, but an internal affirmation of life, an expression of the will to power that seeks to transcend the limitations of the past and build a future full of purpose and authenticity. The eternal return as an affirmation of life. One of Nietzsche's most important concepts in relation to nihilism is that of the eternal return. The eternal return is the idea that if we had to live our life over and over again, exactly the same, would we live it differently? For Nietzsche, this concept is a test of our ability to affirm life in its entirety without wanting to escape suffering or the negative aspects of existence. Through eternal return, Nietzsche challenges us to live in such a way that we can accept our life as an eternal cycle of creation and recreation. Accepting eternal return means accepting life as it is, with its joys and sufferings, its successes and failures. This concept becomes a form of radical affirmation of life, as it invites us to live without regrets, without the desire to change what has already happened. Nihilism is overcome when we are able to live with the total acceptance of our existence, not waiting for a transcendental meaning, but creating our own meaning in each moment. The Superman as the answer to nihilism. The Übermensch or Superman is Nietzsche's answer to nihilism. The Superman is the individual who has overcome the existential void and despair caused by nihilism by creating his own values and his own purpose. Instead of succumbing to despair, the Superman creates a meaningful life based on the affirmation of life and the will to power. The Superman does not need a transcendental purpose or a divine purpose, but creates his own meaning through his actions and decisions. The Superman, in this sense, is the model for overcoming nihilism, a figure who lives without the need for external justification, who does not depend on old beliefs or values, and who dedicates himself to self-creation and the affirmation of life in all its dimensions. Conclusion of the chapter. In On Nihilism, the Void in Human Life, Nietzsche offers us a vision of nihilism not as an end, but as an opportunity for self-liberation and the creation of meaning. Nihilism, which arises with the disappearance of transcendental values, is a crisis that must be overcome by creating new values that reflect our will to power. Overcoming nihilism is a process of affirming life, culminating in the creation of an authentic existence, full of purpose and strength. In the next chapter, The Evolution of Values, we will explore how values change over time and how these processes of transformation affect both the individual and society in general. Chapter 17. The Evolution of Values. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche analyzes how values change over time and how these processes of transformation affect both the individual and society. The evolution of values is a central theme in Nietzsche's philosophy, since for him, values are not absolute or immutable, but are the result of historical, cultural, and social processes that reflect the needs and aspirations of a society at a given moment. Throughout this chapter, Nietzsche shows us how the evolution of values is a manifestation of the will to power, a force that drives human beings to constantly redefine their morality and their objectives, overcoming the limitations of past beliefs. The historical creation of values. Nietzsche begins this chapter by emphasizing that the values that predominate in a society are not products of pure reason or of a universal truth, but historical constructions that have been imposed by social, religious, and political institutions. Values, according to Nietzsche, are the result of power struggles, of social interests, and of the historical circumstances of a particular era. What a society considers good or as bad is not a divine or transcendental revelation, but a human creation that reflects power relations and dynamics of control. Throughout history, values have changed to adapt to new social and cultural realities. The dominant values of an era are not eternal, but respond to the needs and tensions of society at a given moment. For example, the Christian values of humility and sacrifice, which dominated much of Western history, emerged in a context of oppression and suffering, where these virtues served to maintain control over individuals. However, according to Nietzsche, these values are not universal, but products of a particular historical epoch and are therefore subject to transformation. The morality of slaves and the morality of masters. One of the key distinctions that Nietzsche makes in this chapter is between the morality of slaves and the morality of masters. The morality of slaves is a morality that emerged among the oppressed, the weak, and the resentful, who, unable to exercise power over others, developed a morality based on humility, suffering, and submission. This morality is a reaction to powerlessness and aims to subvert the will to power of strong individuals, extolling the virtues of patience, compassion, and sacrifice. On the other hand, the morality of the lords is a morality based on self-affirmation, the creation of values, and the will to power. The lords are individuals who do not need to submit to an external morality, but who create their own principles and live according to their desires and aspirations. The Lord's morality is linked to self-sufficiency, creativity, and the affirmation of life, while the slave's morality is a reactive morality, arising from impotence and resentment. Nietzsche sees the rise of the morality of slaves, especially in the form of Christianity, as an inversion of natural and human values. According to him, Christian morality has inverted the morality of the lords, exalting weakness and suffering, and devaluing strength, power, and creativity. For Nietzsche, the evolution of values must go beyond this slave morality towards a more radical affirmation of life and the will to power. The evolution of values in modern society. Nietzsche also reflects on how the evolution of values in modern society is marked by the growing influence of science, reason, and rationalism. In modernity, religious and traditional values have begun to lose their power, giving way to a crisis of values in which individuals are deprived of a transcendental purpose or a universal morality. This vacuum of values is one of the causes of the nihilism that Nietzsche identifies in contemporary society. The challenge, according to Nietzsche, is to overcome this nihilism by creating new values that are more suitable for modern life. Instead of returning to traditional values, humanity must forge new principles that reflect the will to power, self-affirmation, and personal freedom. The creation of new values is a dynamic and creative process, which requires individuals to take responsibility for their own lives and free themselves from the restrictions of the past. The evolution of values in the individual. Nietzsche also applies the idea of the evolution of values to the individual level. In each person's life, values evolve as the individual grows and develops. Throughout their lives, people change their beliefs, their priorities, and their worldview, and these changes reflect the process of self-creation and personal growth. The creation of new values is, for Nietzsche, a form of self-liberation, as it allows the individual to transcend imposed values and live in accordance with their true nature and will to power. The evolution of values in the individual is not an easy or automatic process, but a constant challenge of reflection, self-criticism, and transformation. By questioning our beliefs and values, we can free ourselves from the limitations imposed by society and traditional morality and begin to live more authentically and freely. The importance of the transvaluation of values. One of the key concepts that Nietzsche introduces in this chapter is the idea of the transvaluation of values. Transvaluation involves the radical transformation of existing values, a process in which old values are replaced by new values that reflect a more authentic and powerful affirmation of life. This transvaluation is essential for the creation of a new morality, a morality that celebrates life, creativity, and the will to power. The transvaluation of values is a difficult and dangerous task, as it involves challenging the fundamental beliefs that underpin society. However, it is also a liberating task, allowing individuals and cultures to overcome decadent values and create new principles that reflect a more authentic and powerful life. Transvaluation, for Nietzsche, is an act of rebellion against conformism and traditional morality and a crucial step towards the creation of a freer and more meaningful life. Conclusion of the chapter. In The Evolution of Values, Nietzsche presents us with a dynamic vision of values, which are neither static nor absolute, but are the result of historical, social, and personal processes. The creation of new values is an essential process for overcoming the nihilism and the crisis of values that characterize modern society. The transvaluation of values, both on a social and individual level, is the path towards a more authentic, free, and creative life, in which the individual can live in accordance with their own will to power and their personal vision of the world. In the next chapter, The Meaning of the Struggle in Life, we will explore how struggle and conflict are fundamental elements for human growth and how we can transform the challenges of life into opportunities for improvement and affirmation of life. Chapter 18. The Meaning of the Struggle in Life. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche addresses a fundamental theme of his philosophy: struggle as an essential element for human growth. Throughout his work, Nietzsche emphasizes that life is not a process of constant comfort and satisfaction, but a series of conflicts and challenges that we must face and overcome in order to affirm our existence. Struggle, in the Nietzschean vision, is a vital force that drives individuals to transcend their limitations and become something greater and stronger. Struggle as a vital principle. Nietzsche begins this chapter by stating that struggle should not be seen as a necessary evil or an obstacle to be avoided, but as a vital principle in human life. Instead of living a life without difficulties, Nietzsche argues that we should embrace struggle as an integral part of the human experience. Struggle is, for him, a manifestation of the will to power, which is the primordial force that drives individuals to surpass themselves and to overcome the limits imposed by society, culture, or even nature itself. Struggle, then, is not just a question of resistance or confrontation, but an opportunity to affirm our will and our capacity to create. Through struggle, human beings not only survive, but rise, creating new possibilities for themselves and for the world around them. Life, in this sense, becomes a continuous process of self-improvement, in which each challenge is an opportunity to grow and transform. The internal struggle and self-transcendence. One of the most important aspects of the struggle, according to Nietzsche, is the internal struggle. Each individual must face and overcome their own fears, insecurities, limitations, and doubts. This internal struggle is essential for the process of self-transcendence, in which the individual seeks to go beyond what they are, creating a more powerful and authentic version of themselves. The internal struggle involves a profound questioning of our own values, beliefs, and desires. Through this constant reflection and challenge, we can overcome the limitations we have imposed on ourselves and reach a state of greater freedom and authenticity. Nietzsche sees the internal struggle as a form of self-creation, in which the individual redefines himself and becomes the architect of his own destiny. Struggle as an affirmation of life. For Nietzsche, struggle is a form of affirmation of life. Life is not something to be avoided or rejected, but something to be affirmed in its totality, with its contradictions, its sufferings, and its joys. Struggle, in this sense, is a manifestation of our will to power, since it is through struggle that we can affirm our existence and give it a deeper meaning. Each challenge and each conflict gives us the opportunity to demonstrate our strength, our ability to adapt, and our will to live fully. Struggle is, for Nietzsche, a way of challenging the limitations imposed by society, traditional morality, or external circumstances. Instead of passively submitting to the difficulties of life, the individual must face them with courage, taking each struggle as an opportunity to affirm their will and to transcend their own limits. Struggle is a form of transformation, both personal and collective. The role of suffering in the struggle. Nietzsche also reflects on suffering as an inherent part of the struggle. Throughout history, suffering has been seen as something negative or to be avoided, but for Nietzsche, suffering is a necessary condition for the growth and affirmation of life. Without suffering, there would be no change, no overcoming, and no creation. Suffering, in this sense, should not be rejected or ignored, but accepted and understood as an integral part of the process of life. The true affirmation of life does not occur in the absence of suffering, but in the ability to face suffering and use it as a tool for transformation. Life is not a path without obstacles, but a path full of challenges that invite us to surpass ourselves. Struggle as an act of freedom. Struggle is also closely linked to the concept of freedom. For Nietzsche, freedom is not simply the absence of external restrictions, but the ability to choose and affirm our own path, regardless of social norms, expectations, or moral conventions. Struggle is a manifestation of this freedom, since it is through struggle that the individual affirms their autonomy and their capacity for self-determination. In facing the challenges of life, the individual not only confronts the outside world, but also their own inner nature. Struggle, then, is a process in which human beings confront the forces that seek to limit or control them, and through confrontation with these forces, they affirm themselves and their freedom. Struggle is, ultimately, an act of self-affirmation, in which the individual chooses to face the difficulties of life rather than flee from them. Struggle as a source of creativity and creation. Nietzsche also sees struggle as a source of creativity and creation. Human life is not simply a passive reaction to events, but an active process of creation that arises from the constant struggle with circumstances. Through struggle, individuals have the opportunity to transform the world around them, to shape their own destinies, and to create something new and valuable from their experiences. For Nietzsche, struggle is the terrain where creativity is tested and expressed in its purest form. It is in the midst of conflict and difficulty that human beings have the opportunity to reinvent themselves, to create new forms of life and meaning. Without struggle, creativity would be limited, since challenge is what drives innovation, transformation, and improvement. Struggle and human greatness. Finally, Nietzsche links struggle with human greatness. For him, true greatness is not found in comfort or immediate satisfaction, but in the ability to affirm life despite adversity. Human greatness is the result of the constant struggle to better oneself, to transcend the limitations imposed by society, nature, or one's own insecurities. Struggle is what allows human beings to reach their full potential and live authentically and powerfully. Conclusion of the chapter. In the meaning of the struggle in life, Nietzsche shows us that struggle is a vital and essential force for the growth and affirmation of life. Life is not something to be avoided, but something to be affirmed through struggle. Whether in the form of internal or external struggles, the challenges of life are opportunities to better ourselves, to create, and to transform. Struggle is an integral part of the process of self-transcendence, and it is through struggle that we can live authentically and reach our full potential. In the next chapter, The Mystery of Existence, Embracing the Uncertain, we will explore how the uncertainty inherent in human existence can be embraced as a fundamental part of the experience of life, and how acceptance of the uncertain can lead us to greater freedom and creativity. Chapter 19, The Mystery of Existence, Accepting the Uncertain. In this chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche confronts one of the most profound questions of human philosophy, the uncertainty inherent in existence. Human life is marked by doubt, ambiguity, and the unknown, and Nietzsche, far from rejecting these aspects, embraces them as fundamental elements of the human experience. For Nietzsche, the mystery of existence is not something to be feared or avoided, but something that should be accepted and affirmed. Instead of searching for definitive answers or a predetermined meaning, Nietzsche invites us to live in the mystery of life, to find freedom in uncertainty and to create meaning in a world that does not offer it immediately. Uncertainty as an essential part of life. Nietzsche begins this chapter by highlighting that uncertainty is an essential characteristic of human life. The search for a clear and definitive meaning, a predetermined purpose, is an illusion that arises from the human need for control and security. Life, in its essence, is full of the uncertain and the unknown, and to try to escape this is to deny one of the deepest dimensions of existence. Uncertainty is, according to Nietzsche, something we must learn to accept and live with, since it is precisely in uncertainty where the freedom to create and affirm our own existence is found. Human life is inherently uncertain. We do not know what the future holds, nor how our actions and decisions will influence the events around us. Fear of the unknown is natural, but instead of trying to eliminate or control it, Nietzsche proposes that we should embrace uncertainty and use it as an opportunity for creation and self-discovery. It is in this space of uncertainty where true freedom is found, as it gives us the power to create meaning and purpose in a world that offers no clear or definitive answers. The rejection of absolute certainties. One of Nietzsche's key points is his rejection of absolute certainties. For centuries, religions, ideologies, and dogmatic philosophies have offered definitive answers about the meaning of life, morality, and human destiny. However, Nietzsche sees these certainties as a form of self-deception, a way of avoiding the true freedom that comes from accepting uncertainty. Absolute certainties, according to Nietzsche, limit creativity and the human capacity to question and explore. By clinging to pre-established answers, individuals miss the opportunity to live authentically and to create their own values. Nietzsche argues that there are no definitive answers to the meaning of life, and that trying to find those answers is a way of evading true freedom. Instead of seeking certainties, we must learn to live with doubt, to be aware of our ignorance, and to accept that the mystery of existence is something that can never be completely solved. Life, for Nietzsche, is about embracing mystery, not completely unraveling it. The mystery of existence as a source of creativity. Nietzsche also sees the mystery of existence as a fundamental source of creativity. By accepting uncertainty, human beings can transcend the limitations of traditional beliefs and begin to create their own meaning. Mystery, far from being an obstacle to life, is what allows individuals to be creative, to shape their destiny, and to define what they consider valuable. Uncertainty offers fertile ground for imagination and innovation, as it frees us from the restrictions of rigid systems of thought. By living with uncertainty, the individual has the possibility of reinventing themselves, of making decisions without the need for external justification, and of finding their own purpose in a world that does not offer clear answers. This creative freedom is one of the greatest sources of personal power and fulfillment, as it allows us to affirm our existence without depending on external certainties. The importance of acceptance and will in an uncertain world. Nietzsche argues that the key to living fully in an uncertain world is the active acceptance of uncertainty and the will to live in spite of it. Life is not something that should be controlled or fully understood, but something that should be accepted in its entirety, with all its contradictions and paradoxes. The will to live fully, to embrace the uncertain and the unknown, is what allows us to find meaning in a world that does not offer it to us easily. Accepting uncertainty is not a passive surrender or an attitude of resignation, but an active affirmation of life. By accepting that we do not have total control over our existence, we can free ourselves from the need for certainties and begin to create meaning through our decisions and actions. Uncertainty, then, becomes a field of possibilities in which we can exercise our will and create the future we desire. Uncertainty and human suffering. Nietzsche also reflects on how uncertainty is closely linked to human suffering. Suffering is, in many cases, the result of not being able to control the events in our lives or of not knowing what the future holds. However, for Nietzsche, suffering should not be seen as an obstacle to be avoided, but as an inevitable part of life that can be used to grow and transform. Uncertainty increases suffering, but it also offers the opportunity to transcend it through the affirmation of life. Suffering, then, is fertile ground for the creation of meaning. Unable to predict what will happen, individuals have the opportunity to actively face suffering, choosing how to respond to difficulties and how to make sense of events. This capacity to create meaning in the midst of uncertainty and suffering is what allows individuals to live with freedom and authenticity. Uncertainty as a path to self-affirmation. In conclusion, Nietzsche sees uncertainty not as something negative, but as a source of power and freedom. By accepting the mystery of existence, the individual can free himself from the limitations of absolute certainties and begin to live more authentically and creatively. Uncertainty allows human beings to be creators of their own destiny, instead of being slaves to pre-established answers. By embracing uncertainty, we can discover a deeper freedom, one that allows us to live according to our own will and sense of purpose. Conclusion of the chapter. In the mystery of existence, accepting the uncertain, Nietzsche invites us to see uncertainty not as a curse, but as an opportunity. The lack of clear answers about the meaning of life gives us the freedom to create our own purpose, to live according to our will, and to affirm life in its entirety, with its mysteries and challenges. Accepting the uncertain becomes a form of self-liberation, as it allows us to transcend the limitations of traditional morals and beliefs and find our own truth. In the next chapter, The Wisdom of Living Without a Predetermined Purpose, we will explore how life, even when lacking a predetermined purpose, offers the space for each individual to create their own path without being tied to a pre-established destiny. Chapter 20. The Wisdom of Living Without a Predetermined Purpose. In this final chapter of Human, All Too Human, Nietzsche presents us with one of his most fundamental ideas, the wisdom of living without a predetermined purpose. Throughout his work, Nietzsche challenges the notion that life must have a transcendental or predetermined purpose, something imposed on us from the outside, whether by religion, morality, or social conventions. Instead, for Nietzsche, life is an opportunity to create our own purpose, a purpose that reflects our will to power and allows us to live authentically and autonomously. Living without a predetermined purpose as an act of freedom. Nietzsche begins this chapter by pointing out that life does not have a predetermined purpose, a truth that frees human beings from the restrictions imposed by traditional beliefs. Throughout history, many religions and philosophies have dictated a purpose for human life, whether it be to serve a god, to achieve salvation, or to follow an established morality. However, Nietzsche argues that living under these external impositions denies true human freedom. Authentic freedom, according to Nietzsche, is the ability to live without a predetermined purpose, to create our own meaning and destiny. By not depending on an external narrative about what we should be or do, the individual is freed from social restrictions and expectations and can begin to live according to his or her own will and desires. Life, then, becomes an open space of possibilities, where we can build our own path without being subject to a predestined destiny or external morality. The creation of personal purpose. For Nietzsche, the fact that there is no predetermined purpose in life should not lead us to nihilism or despair, but rather offers us the opportunity to create our own purpose. Instead of waiting for something external to give meaning to our existence, we must take responsibility for defining what is important to us and live in accordance with our own values. The will to power is the driving force behind this creation of meaning, as it allows us not only to accept life as it is, but to transform it according to our personal vision. Creating our own purpose is an act of self-determination, which allows us to live in an authentic way, consistent with our true nature. By not depending on an imposed morality or a predetermined purpose, the individual has the capacity to actively shape their life, choosing their goals, their values, and their aspirations. This capacity to create a personal purpose is, for Nietzsche, the basis of true freedom. Life as a process of constant creation. Nietzsche stresses that living without a predetermined purpose does not mean renouncing all objective or meaning, but implies a process of continuous creation. Human life, for Nietzsche, is a dynamic process in which we are constantly creating, overcoming, and reinventing our sense of existence. This process of continuous creation reflects the will to power, which is the force that drives individuals to overcome their limitations, to transcend what they are in search of something greater and more powerful. To live without a predetermined purpose is an act of self-affirmation, as it allows us to affirm ourselves as creators of our own reality. Instead of living according to an external purpose, we give ourselves the right and the ability to create the meaning of our life in each moment. Life, then, becomes a work of art, a creative process that allows us to live freely, authentically, and powerfully. Criticism of dogmatic systems and imposed moralities. One of Nietzsche's most profound criticisms in this chapter is of the dogmatic systems that have attempted to impose a single purpose or meaning on all human beings. Whether through religion, politics, or traditional morality, these institutions have attempted to dictate what is good or right for individuals, limiting their freedom and capacity for self-determination. Nietzsche sees these impositions as a form of oppression that denies the individual's true will to power. By accepting these absolute truths without question, individuals relinquish their ability to create and live according to their own principles. For Nietzsche, true wisdom lies in freeing oneself from these dogmatic systems and living according to one's own will to power, without submitting to predefined values or external expectations. Life as an affirmation of freedom. Living without a predetermined purpose also implies a radical affirmation of life. Life, in its chaos and complexity, has no fixed meaning or single purpose, but this should not lead us to despair, but rather to a full acceptance of what it is. By affirming ourselves as creators of our own existence, we embrace life in its entirety, with its challenges, sufferings, and joys, without depending on a transcendental purpose to give it meaning. Life, for Nietzsche, is an open field of possibilities, and to live without a predetermined purpose is to live with freedom and creativity. True wisdom, according to Nietzsche, lies in the ability to accept the chaos of life and, at the same time, transform it into an opportunity to create something new and meaningful. Life is a work of art that we are constantly shaping with our decisions, our actions, and our will. Overcoming the existential void through the creation of purpose. The fact that life does not have a predetermined purpose may seem terrifying, but Nietzsche sees it as an opportunity for self-creation. Instead of succumbing to existential emptiness and despair, we must take responsibility for creating the purpose of our life. By creating our own purpose, we free ourselves from nihilism and discover that life has a personal and unique meaning that only we can give it. For Nietzsche, purpose is not something that is discovered, but something that is created. Through the will to power, the individual can overcome existential emptiness and live authentically, creating a purpose that reflects their deepest desires, passions, and aspirations. This process of creating purpose is, for Nietzsche, a form of self-affirmation and one of the highest expressions of human freedom. Conclusion of the chapter. In the wisdom of living without a predetermined purpose, Nietzsche invites us to free ourselves from the need to find an external or transcendental purpose for our lives. Instead of expecting definitive answers, we must accept that life is an open space where we can create our own meaning and purpose. Living without a predetermined purpose is an act of self-determination, creation, and freedom. By living according to our own will to power, we can transcend the limitations of traditional morality and social expectations, creating an authentic, free, and meaningful life. This approach leads us to a life of constant creation, where every decision and every action is an opportunity to affirm our existence and live fully. By accepting the mystery and uncertainty of life, we can discover a deeper and more authentic freedom. We have reached the end of Friedrich Nietzsche's Human, All Too Human. Throughout this journey, we have explored profound ideas about freedom, individuality, struggle, nihilism, and the creation of personal values. Nietzsche invites us to live a life without predetermined purposes, to embrace uncertainty, and to be the architects of our own existence, without submitting to social impositions or traditional beliefs. The wisdom of living according to our will to power and the constant self-affirmation of our existence open the door to an authentic and free life. This summary has been made exclusively by us, with the aim of offering you the most relevant lessons from Nietzsche's work in an understandable and accessible way. If this content resonated with you and inspired you to reflect on your life and the world around you, don't forget to subscribe to our Audio Mentors channel. By doing so, you will be able to continue exploring more audiobooks, summaries, and deep reflections that will guide you on your path to self-knowledge and personal growth. Thank you for joining us on this philosophical journey, and see you in the next audiobook.